Hey guys, welcome to part 1 of What If Naruto was trained by Anko. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe, and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more videos of your liking, and also check out my other playlist, hope you would like them too. So let's get started. The air was dry, heavy almost, with the unnatural heat. It was a heat that had baked the ground solid and almost turned it to glass. It never faded. It felt as if it was attempting to consume the landscape with a relentless hunger. In the distance, the heated nighttime air was filled with hoarse shouts. They seemed to grow closer for a moment, and then faded away, leaving only a silent void with nothing but the unbearable heat. This was the world that the Yondim awoke to, his body stiff and sore. He could taste the copper of his own blood, and his mind could only struggle in an attempt of rational thought. He wasn't finished yet. This thought was galvanized by the feel of the bundle in his arms moving. He had to get up. He had to. Biting his lip to keep from screaming at the pain he was placing on his already taxed body, he rose shakily to his feet. It had been so painful, almost murder, to use that jutsu. But he couldn't think about that. He held the still moving but silent bundle in his arm tightly, forcing his way upright. Stumbling, he almost collapsed as one of his legs tried to give out, but his fanatically devotion to protect the village allowed him to force his way through the pain. He scanned the world around him, swaying, and wondered if the village would ever recover. He could see the shattered walls of the village. Nobody was moving near them. Fear would be rampant. Now was his chance to protect the village. He stumbled forward, struggling to maintain his balance and keep from dropping the precious bundle in his arms. He almost collapsed, but managed to reach the hole where he fell forward, thankfully managing to brace himself up with one hand. He didn't as long. He had to hurry. But his chakra, it was almost gone. He could feel the god of death's cold fingers digging deeper into his soul. A hacking cough racked his body, followed by a spray of dark blood. Could he do it? No, he had to. If anyone found him now with this baby, he couldn't let that happen. He had to do something. He couldn't let them know, and he could feel several ninja approaching at high speed, not to him but the fallen shinobi around him. They would find him if he stayed much longer, but he honestly didn't know how much chakra he had left. He could die at any moment, and he had to ensure he was finished before then. His only chance was to gamble. Gamble his life, the baby in his arms' life, and Konoha's future. Yondim didn't see any other option, however. He would have to use the Freishin no Jutsu. Closing his eyes, he concentrated, struggling to separate the hundreds of different locations for the one he needed. Finding it, he started molding all of his remaining chakra, praying that this would work. 1 minute he was propped up against the shattered wall, the next he was sprawling across the shattered pavement in front of the darkened hospital. Suddenly the baby started crying, making an unholy racket. The Yondim coughed, the cold fingers of Shinigami-sama tightening around his throat. Placing his palm against the ground, he leveraged himself upwards, blood splattering the ground as he stumbled back to his feet. Forcing his way through the cracked glass doors, he stumbled into the dark hospital, his eyes darting all around, disorientated. Stumbling, he started toward a set of damaged stairs, almost collapsing. He managed to keep his balance and reached the nearly empty hallway, almost collapsing once more. He couldn't fall yet. Just a little bit more, a little bit more. His mind was already crumbling, but he couldn't stop. He had something important to do. Forcing the door open, he stumbled into the dark room filled with crying babies. Finally, he could. Stumbling to an empty crib, he managed to release the child, ignoring the blood streaks on the boy's young face. The child would be safe now. Safe. Yondim-sama. At that shout, his legs gave out and he collapsed to his knees, staring up at the terrified-looking nurse. She seemed so far away, but she was getting closer, reaching out to him. But Yondim pulled away. Please. Help me. What? The QB. D dead. Coughing, he fell forward onto his hands, breath becoming ragged. Please. Help. The nurse nodded cautiously, kneeling in front of him. What? They just. One brave shinobi was able to seal up the demon, but he lost his life. That shinobi was called the Yondim Hokage. Chapter 1 Graduation. Mountain Winery. The road was well cared for, with no tracks marking the telltale signs of carts. The road itself that winded its way up and over the mountain was only wide enough for two people to pass with comfort. On top of the mountain, of course, things flattened out its top and been sliced clean off during the QB's attack minus, and in the center was a large crater, where it was rumored the Yondem had first assaulted the beast. The merchant currently traveling the road was chubby with more than 3 thouls and dressed in the finest clothes that money could buy. It was safe to say that he was indeed wealthy. He owned several shops in Konoha and other various large villages inside the country of Fire Minus, and he gave generously to charities, yet this was not to say that he was a very nice person. This particular merchant was very greedy, and anything he donated he made back by raising his prices. Using a silk scarf to wipe the sweat away from his face and neck. His mistress had made it quite clear that if he did not lose at least one chin she would dump him, and then speak to his wife. So of course the merchant had taken to walking up Mountain Winery, one of the most secure roads in the country, minus to lose the required weight. Reaching the top of the mountain, he turned back to stare out over the way he had come. He could see the vast sea of trees that marked the boundaries of the hidden village of Konoha. To the south he could faintly make out a series of flatlands that rolled off endlessly, flanked to the west with distant hills. To the east, standing out over the forest and showing the true location of the most powerful military power on the continent, was the infamous Hokage Mountain. Gathering his nicely tailored cloak tighter, he turned and started walking once more. His goal today was to see the exact center of the crater on Mount Winery. Maybe he could make some money selling dirt or rocks from the fabled location. Reaching the crest of the crater, he paused, his mouth going dry as he stared in disbelief at what he saw. There, covered in dirt, was what looked like a rather large, about the size of a man minus white ball. The gears in the merchant's head suddenly started turning rapidly. He knew the legends involving Kitsune. His grandmother had been very fond of telling them, among others, to him. According to the legend, Kitsune would place power into a ball and then either hide it or use it as a child would. He wet his lips, slipping and sliding down the sloping crater edges, mind racing. The QB had been a Kitsune, an immensely powerful one. A 9 tails rarer than any other. If this, for what other Kitsune would have such a large ball minus, did belong to the QB, then it might still contain a portion of its power sealed inside. He could sell it to the Hokage, or Rock and Lightning would pay anything to get their hands on it. With this, it would be possible to surpass the country of fire in power. Reaching the ball, he carefully moved closer, and reached out, hand trembling as he thought about the amount of money he was now facing. He was sadly disappointed, however, when the ball disappeared in a puff of smoke, and the ground gave out from under him. Landing in a heap, he was disorientated and confused, at least until he heard a familiar laughter. Looking up at the edge of the pit he had fallen into, he stared coldly at a blonde-haired child dressed in orange, who was laughing at him. "How dare you? I'll has your head for this." Crouching down, Naruto rested his arms on his knees, his face looking disgusted. "Oi, I think all those kids you cheated yesterday should has your head." The merchant paused, considering how to get out of this. Apparently, Naruto had been present yesterday when he had sold cheaply made items to a group of orphans at outrageous prices. The boy just did not understand business, yet the merchant also knew that trying to explain it would be pointless. So instead he would have to lie. He was good at lying. Yes, maybe you're right." Nodding, the man looked as pitiful as he could. "I'm sorry, of course you're right. I should has never. I just let my greed get the best of me. I'll refund their money as soon as I get back." Offering his hand, he smiled disarmingly. "Help me out." "Bah." Naruto muttered dismissively, lowering his head, as he hesitantly held his hand out to the man. Reaching out to grasp it, he was suddenly jolted when Naruto slapped his hand away and grinned mischievously. "Yeah right, idiot." Naruto laughed, eyes closing as he made a thumbs down sign. "You think I'm that stupid? Hey. If you don't help me get out, then I'll tell the Hokage what you've done." The merchant felt his anger fading, however, as the blonde's eyes narrowed and he stood up. Unable to look away, he watched as the boy unzipped his pants, revealing his intention. "What are you doing? You pissed on those orphans, so I'm going to piss on you." "Hey. Don't. No." The merchant begged, hands coming up in a prayer position and lowering his head. "Here it comes." Naruto gloated, groaning in comfort. "Vaya. Naruto. Tomorrow is the Ninja Academy graduation exam," said the tall man with a scar on the bridge of his nose. Staring at the bleary-eyed students, the man nodded, crossing his arms across his green vest. "Today I think it would be best to review a few things that might come up on the test." There was a notable upswing in attention and the man's side. First off, who can name the 5 great shinobi nations? He was not surprised to see half the hands go up, especially the pink-haired girl that sat in the second row next to a black-haired boy. Yes, Sakura, go ahead. Standing, the girl practically beamed, glancing at the boy beside her. Ahem, the 5 great shinobi nations are fire, wind, stone, lightning and water. Each country is ruled by a daimyo who decides laws and various polices. The respective hidden villages are controlled by cages who are equal to the daimyo. The system has been likened to having one country inside of another. Right, and why are there cages and ninja? The man asked, glancing at the timid hand raised in the far back. Yes, Hinata. Una. The existence of a shinobi village means military power. The shy, white-eyed girl offered from her seat. Correct. Shifting his gaze to the others, he paused, noticing the lack of orange in the students, and frowned. The body is divided into 3 sections. What are their names and importance? Oka scanned the room, picked on the boy who was staring out of the window at the clouds. Shikamaru. The boy sighed, shifting his gaze toward him before answering apathetically. High, middle and low. Each section contains vital areas, which we should be aggressive in attacking and ending the fight as soon as possible. What does the high section include, and what damage can be inflicted? This is troublesome. Shikamaru sighed, looking back out the window. The high section contains the top of the head, which if struck forcefully because trauma to the cranial cavity, a severe strike can cause death. The high section also contains 13 other targets. Examples. Groaning, Shikamaru closed his eyes. The temples, where the bones of the skull are weak and an artery and large nerve lie close to the skin. If severed, it compresses the brain and kills. The eyes, where a jab can result in either blurred vision, gouged out, or if the finger penetrates the thin bone behind the eye and into the brain, death. There are also the ears, which if struck hard enough can rupture an eardrum. Nodding when the pineapple-headed boy finished, he shifted his gaze to the boy next to Sakura. What else, Sasuke? The chin, which if hit hard enough can cause paralysis, a mild concussion or unconsciousness. The back of the ears and base of skull, which if hit moderately hard can cause unconsciousness, while a powerful blow can cause a concussion or death. There is also the throat, where you can crush the windpipe, or the side of the neck, where a sharp blow can cause unconsciousness. For maximum effect, the blow should be focused below and slightly in front of the ear. What about the middle and low sections? Oka questioned, glancing at a boy dressed in a large high-collared white coat. Shino. The solar plexus, which if hit hard enough can snap the thin bone and push it into the heart. The kidneys, knees and the genin on the back of the ankle. The boy answered without looking away from his study of the insect on his finger. Very good. What about the 9 steps? Oka said, directing his gaze to the blonde girl, dressed in purple, who had been wistfully gazing at the boy next to Sakura. INO. The girl worked, her attention returning to the front of the classroom. Then, blushing amidst that laughter, answered, stealthy step, cross step, night walking step, serpent step, dragon step, rushing step, entering pivot, side step, lost track pivot. When ascending a stairway, keep as close as possible to the wall and climb using the cross step. On stone steps, this will aid in concealing your position. On wooden stairs, this will prevent creaking since the stairs are most secure nearest the wall and are thus less likely to shift as weight is applied. Oka opened his mouth to ask his next question when the door opened and the all-too-familiar face of Uchiha Yoshiro, one of the oldest and most respected officers in Konoha's police force, stepped into the room. Yoshiro remained silent since Oka knew exactly what this meant. Turning, the scarred Jonin sighed, nodded an amused-looking Mizuki. The cyan-haired man stepped to the front of the room as Oka hurried up the steps, and then nodding faintly at Yoshiro disappeared out the door. Careful brushwork. Total concentration. Dignity and respect. Silence. That was the old man's surroundings as he carefully inked a letter to the great daimyo of the fire country. All around him were the trappings of his station, a raised platform draped with a black carpet. It was rare for him to have the time to this, usually his letters were rushed and hurried, but today, even the troublemakers were isolated in the academy. Nobody would skip class this close to the final examination. He would have the entire day to himself to concentrate on his brushwork. Hokage-sama. Stifling a curse, he stared at the now smudged kanji. Count to 10 and do not kill them. They are only messengers. Calm once more, he turned to see what emergency had brought them to him. He just barely managed to repress a groan upon seeing the two familiar uniforms of Konoha's police and a tightly bound and gagged boy named Naruto. Sandame took a deep breath on his pipe, exhaling slowly. What did he do this time? He forced Matsushima-san into a hole on top of Mount Unyuri and then proceeded to urinate on him. Uchiha Teka said, scowling. We would have handed him off to undo like normal, but he's almost 13, Hokage-sama. Uchiha Inabe said seriously. We wanted to ensure that he understood what that meant. I understand, and I am sure Naruto knows what it means. Sandame said, turning his gaze on the boy, letting his displeasure to shine through. Thank you for bringing him to me. No problem, Hokage-sama. Teka said, bowing, as he turned to leave. His partner offered a bow shortly afterwards and followed, leaving the old man and young criminal alone. Taking another puff on his pipe, Sandame considered the irate-looking boy before he closed his eyes. It would not be long before Oka showed up to collect his wayward charge. Again. This is getting tiring, Naruto. Sandame said after a moment, opening his eyes to stare at the boy. Honestly, why do you insist on causing so much trouble? Naruto muttered something through his gag and Sandame sighed, closing his eyes once more, wondering what was taking Oka so long. Soon enough the door to his office opened and a harried-looking Jonin with a scar across his nose entered the room. Oka paused, seeing the tied-up Naruto, and then sighed, looking up to meet the Hokage's gaze. Sandame Hokage-sama. I apologize for this. Oka. I was expecting you a bit sooner. Sandame said kindly, before lowering his gaze to an angry-looking Naruto. He's a handful, isn't he? Yes, Hokage-sama. Oka said with a sheepish grin before reaching down to grab the boy and yank him upright. What the hell are you doing during class time? Shaking his head, the Hokage couldn't help but take an extra long puff on his pipe before letting out several smoke rings, listening to Naruto's angry though muffled minus retorts. Sometimes, like now minus, he wondered how he ever let the Nidame ever talk him into taking this job. Oh yay. The girls. Oka sighed, watching as Naruto used the shovel to fill in the hole he had so painstakingly dug. Well, Naruto would think it was painstaking. Oka was sure that everyone else would see it as appalling. Oka was torn on the matter, mainly because of the effort these pranks took. If only Naruto would apply himself to his studies as he did with these types of things. Then again, since Naruto seemed to think differently than everyone else, it was just amazing that the boy could function even semi-normally. Naruto. Why do you keep doing this sort of thing? Oka asked finally, and not for the first time. He was not expecting an answer, he had never gotten one yet. Naruto would just ignore him and keep cleaning up whatever it was he had done. That bastard cheated a bunch of orphans. Naruto said hotly, and Oka sighed. So that was why, with all of Naruto's enthusiasm about being Hokage and a ninja, he had skipped a review session. It was not a widely thought about fact, but Oka understood why this would bother Naruto so much. Without parents, Naruto had been forced to raise himself, and he had not exactly been treated kindly either. That was the reason Oka had even noticed him, because it was like looking back in time at himself after his own parents had died. Only Naruto had never had parents. Or anyone else. Oka spotted the shift in body weight and crossed his arms. I'm not letting you go home until you clean all of it. Naruto tensed, then looked up at him, eyes closed and face defiant. Then grunting, the blonde started shoveling dirt once more, mumbling something. Oka could not help but sigh and lean back, remembering his own parents. He could vividly remember the emptiness and sense of abandonment each time he went home when he had been 12. That was a mistake. Any time he did that, he always felt like letting Naruto go, but he could not do that. The boy needed to learn that there were consequences for his actions. Naruto. What now? Naruto complained, eyes squinting up at him in distrust. Scratching his nose, Oka looked thoughtful. Well, if you clean all of this up, I'll buy you some ramen tonight. Looking down, he fought to keep from grinning at the way Naruto's face brightened. It was amazing how easily the boy could be cheered up. Oka could remember the first time he had ever seen Naruto, and introduced him to the joy that was ramen. Okay. I'll work really hard. I will. Naruto cheered as the dirt literally started flying, as if a hyperactive dog was at work. Then you'll have to buy me 2 bowls. What? I never said that. Oka shouted before chuckling at the way the boy concentrated on the task. Not for the first time, Iruka wished Naruto would concentrate like that during class time. In all honesty, Naruto was not a bad ninja, he just never tired. For a moment he mused using the ramen bribe more often, but like always realized that he could just barely afford buying Naruto ramen once in the blue moon. The boy ate ramen like a fish breathed water. Done. Naruto shouted happily and Iruka jerked in surprise. That was fast. 2 hours later Iruka was admitting such to Naruto as they both entered their favorite ramen stand. Naruto brushed it off and excitedly hopped onto a stall shouting for pork ramen while Iruka made small talk with Iame until her father shot them a dark glance. Iruka patiently waited until they were both served. Iame served him with a wink and blush minus then decided to attempt a serious talk with Naruto, who had removed his goggles. Naruto. The blonde in question looked up, making a noise while happily slurping his noodles. I didn't want to say it. But you've got to stop these pranks. Especially if you want to be Hokage. Ho. Naruto glanced at him, talking around a mouthful of ramen. Why? You're almost 13, Naruto. If you fail the exam this time, then next year we has to expel you from the academy. That makes you a civilian and then the police will not give you to Anbu or the Hokage. You'll be put in jail. Iruka explained, not sugarcoating it a teensy bit. Well, I'm going to be Hokage, so screw that. Naruto said happily before he shoveled an inhuman amount of ramen into his mouth. Naruto. Do you really understand what the Hokage is? Choking the ramen noodles in his mouth down, Naruto nodded, his face equally serious. A Hokage is the strongest and most respected ninja in the village. Then you has to stop the pranks and pass this exam. One day I'm going to be Hokage. Naruto said softly before thrusting his hand holding a pair of chopsticks at Iruka. And then I'm going to surpass all the Hokages. Even the Yondim. I will pass. Iruka opened his mouth to refute that, but he saw the way those blue eyes glinted and he just sighed. He just could not take the boy's dream away, no matter how unrealistic it was. By the way, Sensei. I has a request. Naruto suddenly said, his voice almost pleading. He even had his hands together as if in prayer. Can I borrow your leaf forehead protector? Iruka smirked as best he could with a full mouth, reaching up to adjust the object in question. No, this is for after you graduate. It's the symbol that you've come of age, maybe you'll get one tomorrow. Stingy. Naruto shouted and Iruka laughed. So that's why you removed your goggles. Seconds. Huh. Now for the last part of the graduation exam. Iruka said, taking the papers from Mizuki, setting them on the desk. Turning back to the class he smiled faintly, you will do the Bunshine no Jutsu. He shared a brief smile with Mizuki before turning back to the group. When you're called, come to the next room. That said, both teachers turned, leaving the 23 students to anxiously await their fates. Naruto honestly didn't see the point. If a Bunshine was required, then he had no chance of graduating. He'd failed the last 2 times and each time that was the Techin-K required. To make matters worse, this would be his last year in the academy, like Iruka said last night. He forcibly stopped thinking about that and started concentrating on how he could possibly pass this year. He wouldn't has long to figure it out, he knew Iruka-sensei all too well. Maybe he could use another one of those what you see, is what you get scrolls like he had with that merchant bastard. No, they'd find out. Or, if he wrote it now and then. No, they would know. They always knew when someone tried to cut a corner. Yama Anzai. Mizuki, Iruka's assistant, called and a boy got up from among a crowd of grinning friends to disappear into the next room. Naruto banged his head on the desk, wishing he had some friends to support him. Well, okay, he had Kiba and a few others, but they were mostly just running buddies. They didn't really get along all that well unless pranks, food or cloud watching was involved. Even then it felt like he was out of place. He didn't h time to be thinking about that, he had to figure out how to pass. Wakaivo. Mizuki shouted and another boy from the same group got up and cockily strode into the testing room. Naruto covered his head with his hand, trying to keep from panicking. It wouldn't be long now, soon he has to suffer the torture. Why had he decided to skip yesterday too? He should have reviewed, done something, anything, to prepare. Wait. Maybe he could bug that lazy ass Shikamaru and get him to walk him through the basics again. Lifting his head he turned, preparing to do just that when Mizuki's voice rang out once more. Azumaki Naruto. Naruto didn't move even though he felt a few curious glances directed at him. Uzumaki Naruto. Mizuki shouted, a touch of impatience in his tone, and this time those curious glances became sneers. That spurred Naruto to leap to his feet and onto his desktop, placing his hands on his hips. Oi! I'm coming! That shouted, he leapt over the head of the people in front of him, descending by using the desks instead of the stairs. He almost landed perfectly, but sadly his foot slipped out from under him on the last desk and he landed face first on the ground. Naruto! Iruka suddenly bellowed, and the blonde in question didn't give his wounded pride a second thought as he scrambled to his feet and amidst the laughter darted into the other room. It was just like he remembered from his previous attempts. There against the far wall was a desk with both Iruka and Mizuki. On the desk was a row of forehead protectors. The rest of the room was empty except for a chalkboard. Gathering his nerve, he cautiously approached the center of the room, praying that this time he could do it, perform a bunshine and pass. Prayer quickly became a declaration that he would succeed, and he even silently shouted to his teachers to watch and see. Bringing his hands together, he concentrated, molding his chakra with a fierce determination. He wouldn't fail this time. Chakra swirling around him, he clenched his eyes shut. He could feel the way his chakra moved, slowly at first, sluggish. Then it started speeding up, coursing through him, led perfectly by his will. Naruto urged it on, trying desperately to get it to move faster, to take the cohesive form that he wanted from it. He felt the chakra slipping away, and he fought to clear his mind. He was Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage. He would pass. It was that simple. Suddenly his mind was clear, and his chakra surged upwards in an unprecedented wave. He felt joy, unabashed joy. It was moving so perfectly. No. Wait, it was growing too rapidly. Becoming chaotic. He needed to hurry. Bunshine. There was a loud pop and suddenly his chakra faded, allowing Naruto to relax and open his eyes. Seeing Iruka's look of horror, Naruto hesitantly looked to his right to find that yes, he had produced an illusion of himself, but that it was one of the most pathetic things he had ever seen. Naruto had to fight back the tears of disappointment as the illusion disappeared with a pop and swirl of smoke. Dimly he prayed that it would be enough. He had after all produced a bunshine. Looking at Iruka, he held his breath, waiting the final word. Naruto. You fail. Something inside him collapsed, some inner prop that had been holding him up. Suddenly he was just some kid, without any skills other than making trouble. He wanted to shout at Iruka. Yell and scream how it wasn't fair that he should fail. That he had created a bunshine and that he should be allowed to pass. He didn't want to be a civilian. Just another orphan that could be cheated, lied to, sold and traded. Killed. Iruka-sensei, Mizuki interceded, his voice tentative. This is his third time, and he did technically create a clone. We could let him pass. Naruto stared at Mizuki with almost slavish gratitude before looking at Iruka, who appeared to seriously be considering that argument. Please, 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 oh please. Naruto silently etched the kami. No, Mizuki-sensei. Everyone else divided into three. Naruto only created on clone, and it was pretty useless. Iruka-sensei. He was only required to create one. And he did. Mizuki said doggedly. It's not the number of clones. Iruka answered, tone even. It's the quality of the Techin-K, as it is if he went into the field like this, his bunshine could get him killed. Or worse, his team. Naruto met his teacher's steady gaze with a glare. He didn't understand. How could Iruka do this to him? Weren't they friends? Didn't Iruka introduce him to the joy that was ramen? Wasn't Iruka the one that had last night been worried about him becoming a civilian? I can't let him pass. Those words echoed in Naruto's mind, as he watched from the swing outside of the academy. He saw the kids laughing and voking as they left the building, to be embraced and praised by parents. Everybody was so happy, nobody even seemed to notice him sitting alone in the shade of the tree on the tired old swing. How could Iruka-sensei not pass him? Was it because he really would be a risk on a mission? No, of course not. He just couldn't create an illusion. Not his fault if that technique was crappy. Besides, what use would it be in a fight? Ho, you couldn't even hit anybody with it. Still, Naruto knew Iruka. The man wouldn't fail him, knowing what would happen without a good reason. But Naruto knew he would not be a liability. So what possible reason could there be? Did it even matter he'd failed this test and next year he would be For as long as Naruto could remember, all he had ever wanted to be was a ninja that everyone respected. Someone that could stop bastards like that merchant, or the orphanage workers that used the kids as slave labor. Someone that could stop them from doing what they did. A Hokage. His chest hurt from the knowledge that he had failed and that he would be as ignored as the others, as forgotten. Leaving the swing outside the academy, he roamed away, exploring the currently empty streets. He tired comforting himself with the knowledge that he was more skilled than non-ninja, that he could keep himself safe and he could still help others. Naruto. Turning, Naruto felt surprise registering in him as he stared at the caring face of the cyan-haired older man. Mizuki-sensei. We should talk. Follow me. Mizuki said kindly, and then without a word took a running leap onto an awning before rebounding and working his way higher and higher. Naruto quickly followed, working double time to make the same leaps that his sensei had. Eventually they landed on a balcony without a railing, which provided a great view of the village as the sun set. Sitting down they were silent for several minutes, and then Mizuki sat back, his hands supporting him. Oka-sensei is a serious person. His parents were killed when he was young and he's had to do everything himself. Naruto crossed his arms. He didn't care why, it only mattered that Oka failed him. He probably sees himself in you. Mizuki continued offhandedly. Falling silent they both sat there for a moment before Mizuki continued. Naruto. I'm going to tell you the truth about something. Something you were supposed to never know about. What? It has a lot to do with you, why the villagers are so cold toward you and why Oka wants you to become strong in the real way before you graduate. I need to graduate this year. Naruto mumbled. I know, but this is important, and afterwards I'll tell you how to graduate this year despite the normal rules. Mizuki confided. Really? Thanks. Naruto shouted, his mind running rampant with various thoughts. They were washed away, however, when Mizuki-sensei started speaking. You know, of course, about the great demon that attacked us 12 years ago. We lost the Yondem and many others in that terrible battle. It's the official reason for why we are so militaristic. Yet, Naruto, I don't think it's fair to hide the truth from you anymore. Sighing, Mizuki looked down. Ho. The truth is we're really militaristic because of an event that happened several days after the QB's death. There was another attack on Konoha, this time from within. We're not sure which country it was, but an enemy nation took advantage of the chaos. They launched a toxic jutsu, something Unbu had never seen before or since, inside the hospital. It seemed to originate where the nursery was located, but it was powerful enough to kill everyone inside the building. We lost countless wounded ninja, medics, and of course all the babies inside. Naruto felt his breath catch, wondering about what this had to do with him. Then, seeing the way Mizuki-sensei was staring at him, he felt his stomach fall. All but one. One child, somehow, survived. That's why the villagers treat you so coldly. Many had already lost family and now they had lost even more. But how did I minus? Nobody really knows. For a while the Unbu believed that you were an enemy plant. The villagers themselves believed you were unnatural too, has escaped the attack unscathed. Some of the older generations even said that you were born from the great demon's hate and spite to the village. Am I a monster? Hardly, although with the trouble you cause in the village, you do more to reinforce that idea than anything else. Mizuki answered lightly. The truth is, Naruto, you probably survived due to a fluke. I mean, you lost your entire family too, the beast, on the same day you were born. You never had a chance to know them. Letting you survive was probably an act of kindness from the gods. Naruto looked down, falling silent for several long minutes before continuing. So all those glares and that coldness I suffer is because of something I had no control over. Well, that. And the fact you has been pulling pranks on some of the most well-respected and powerful people in this village since practically the day you were born. Mizuki allowed, sounding amused. Hearing Naruto mutter something about stuck-up bastards deserving it, Mizuki continued. I has to know. How do you create that ball since you can't do a proper hand? Oh. I used one of those. What you see is what you get scrolls from back when I first entered the academy this year. Naruto grinned, eyes closing. I've got 3 left. Mizuki laughed. You really are a clever one. Naruto smiled, feeling a fondness for the man forming. So how do I become strong in the real way? It's the same thing that make Iruka so strong. Mizuki said, tone going serious. He protects you until you are strong enough to show everybody you are not some cursed child. That's why he is strong. He's protecting something precious to him. Precious. Naruto echoed, looking at the man. Yes. That's when a shinobi truly becomes strong, when they're protecting something precious. To me, you are one of my precious students, which, by the way, is the reason I'm going to help you graduate today. Mizuki smiled, and Naruto couldn't help but smile back. Inside, he was almost bursting with pride now. This was the first time anyone other than Iruka had shown this much interest in him. He listened very carefully as Mizuki told him exactly what he was going to need to do and where to go, noting how Mizuki claimed this path to graduation would be much harder than any test he had taken at the academy. When Naruto said that didn't matter, he wanted the chance, Mizuki smiled just a bit more. Good. Now make sure you're at the training area after 8 and practice all night. I'm sure you'll graduate this year. He'd get to graduate. Yes. In your face, Iruka. He won't get away with this one. Hokage-sama. Sandame had to repress the groan of annoyance. These Jonin were looking far too excited to his liking. He was even willing to put money on the fact that these fools would kill Naruto before even thinking about capturing him. Still, he couldn't blame them. This was a very serious matter. Yet somehow he didn't quite think that Naruto was behind the thief. He is carrying a very dangerous scroll. It was forbidden by the previous Hokage. I don't know if he stole it as a joke or someone tricked him into it. Sandame said, his voice just barely raised. I don't want Naruto dead. I want him brought back so we can find out why he did this. It's been half a day since the scroll was stolen, so hurry and find him. That said, he made a majestic sweeping gesture and the gathered ninja took off at high speed, fluttering his robes. Sighing, he lowered his arm, wondering what exactly was going on. He'd been out visiting a friend of the family, and when he'd come back, 2 Chunins were knocked out and they claimed it was Naruto. How the boy could have gained entrance into the Hokage Tower, let alone Sandame's private library, was baffling. Hokage-sama. Turning, Sandame inclined his head at the silver-haired, masked man standing behind him. We didn't find a trace of Naruto's chakra. Or any signs that he was even here. Kakashi offered, his visible eye narrowing. But the eyewitnesses are telling the truth, according to Ibukai-san. So it appears Naruto is better than we first thought. I see. Sandame mused before shaking his head. Well, part of me says it could not have been Naruto. But all the evidence points to him. Which is a shame because I was starting to like him. At Kakashi's silence, Sandame started walking, hands behind his back, aware of Kakashi falling into step behind him. So, how are this year's UNBU recruits? They're fine. Though a majority can barely hold Jonin title. I trust you'll be able to handle them. Yes. Yes. Kakashi answered absently. I received the cipher yesterday from Wind Country. They're politely reminding us that we agreed to host the coming Chunin exam. Yes. Sandame nodded, his eyes narrowing. Please inform them that we are happy to host the Chunin exam provided they understand our laws concerning other military powers inside our walls. Hearing the masked man's muffled giggle, Sandame couldn't suppress his groan of annoyance. He should has never told Freya to write his fantasies down to stay out of trouble. I did it. Finally. Those were the words running through Naruto's mind as he tried to catch his breath and get his body to stop trembling. He couldn't believe how tired he was. It had taken most of the night since discovering the scroll in the woods, but he had done it. He'd finally learned how to do a bunshine properly. Now he could show Iruka-sensei, and then what? Naruto froze, trying to figure out what to do. Mizuki had never explained how training would let him pass. The exam was over and he'd have to wait another whole year to even attempt graduating. Which meant he was going to be another year behind in his goal. He was going to have to suffer another year of distrust and talking behind his back. Besides which, there was no guarantee that Bunshine no Jutsu would be the exam next year. So what was he? Naruto trailed off, sensing the presence of someone else. Looking up, he found Iruka-sensei bent at the waist, hands on his hips and staring at him hard with an awkward grin. I found you. Hey, I found you, nosebleeder. Naruto couldn't help but shout while pointing and jumping to his feet. Idiot. I found you. Iruka shouted back, then paused, staring at Naruto. which sort of made him uncomfortable. Thus Naruto reached up and scratched the back of his head, smiling to hide his nervousness. Why was Iruka looking at him so oddly? He didn't think there was any reason for it. And for that matter, why had Iruka even been looking for him in the first place? Oh. Could he have been after the scroll? Oh shit. Iruka was going to think he stole it. Naruto couldn't help but panic for a moment, scared to death at the prospect of having the thief label added to him. Maybe if he could pass it off as a joke and show what he learned. Hey. You found me. I've only learned one skill. Naruto saw the look of incredulity on Iruka's face, but he had to keep going. You're all beaten up, what were you doing exactly? Crap. He wasn't falling for it. Never mind, but hey. I'm going to try an incredible skill. Naruto noted the look of surprise on the older man's face, and rushed on. If I do it, let me graduate. He had to act now before Iruka had the chance to think. Impress the man and then he'd forget about the scroll for a moment. Lifting his fingers he concentrated, molding the chakra like he'd learned from the scroll. Only part-way through did it occur to him that he might not have enough chakra for this technique. No, he had to has enough. Naruto. Naruto froze, his concentration broken, looking at Iruka. HN. Where did you get the scroll? He noticed. Damn it. Naruto gulped, maybe Iruka would believe the truth. Naruto really hoped so. Otherwise he'd be in a lot of trouble that he didn't want. Oh this. I was out here training like Mizuki sensei suggested, and I found the scroll right where he said it would be. So I opened it and I thought if I learned one of the techniques you'd let me graduate. Naruto registered the shocked look on the man's face a split second before Iruka glanced to the side and slammed a hand into his chest, sending Naruto sailing through the air. This was a bit of a surprise, but even Naruto knew the sound that followed next. The sound of kunai slicing through the air. Opening his eyes as he hit the ground and slid, Naruto saw the black metal slamming into Iruka at full speed and pinning him against a tree. Looking to his left and up, he found the familiar form of Mizuki crouching on a tree branch, one hand in front of him for balance. Naruto couldn't be sure, but he looked like he was smirking. Mizuki never smirked. Nice job in finding him. Naruto glanced away from the man to stare at Iruka, who was struggling to remove the kunai embedded in his green Jonin vest. I see. So that's what's going on. Iruka muttered, wincing as he removed one of the weapons from his shoulder. Naruto quickly climbed to his feet. He had to help Iruka. He froze, however, when Mizuki spoke up once more. Naruto, give me the scroll. That sounded like a command, and Naruto knew not to disobey a teacher within in class or not. But Iruka sensei needed help, and Mizuki seemed to have hurt his friend in the first place. What could he do? Why was this happening? All he wanted to do was graduate. I don't understand. What's going on here? Hey. Naruto shouted, looking back and forth. He wanted someone to tell him the truth. Instead, Iruka lunged forward, forcibly removing a kunai from his chest. Naruto. Don't give him the scroll, even if I die. Iruka stooped slightly, glaring up at Mizuki, who was standing up. That is a dangerous scroll that has forbidden ninjutsu sealed within it. Mizuki used you to cover his tracks after he stole it. Naruto felt something racing up his back. It was cold for a moment, and then suddenly it turned hot. His entire body was reacting on its own, preparing to fight without conscious effort. If Iruka sensei was telling the truth, that bastard Mizuki was going to pay. He had hurt Iruka and betrayed the old man Hokage. Mizuki, however, was looking entirely too amused. Naruto. If you attack me, I will kill you. Bastard. Why? Why did you do this? Naruto shouted angrily, willing his body to stay still for a moment. Logically, he knew there was no way he could beat a Chunin in a straight-up fight, but his body was trying to argue the point. Why? Because I can. Because I want to get stronger, and that scroll was written by the Yondem, the strongest Hokage ever. Mizuki shouted, reaching back for his large throwing star, chuckling, now I'm going to kill you both. Why? Because I can. Mizuki's face twisted into an ugly visage, showing just how deranged his mind had become. Then muscles straining, the cyan-haired school teacher hurled the giant weapon at the boy. Naruto started to move a split second too late, his mind clearing from his emotions to realize the danger he was in. And then his world was obscured by green and black as he was pushed painfully against the ground. Twisting around, he stared up at the bloodied mouth and unfocused eyes of Iruka, who was crouching over him. Naruto could think of only one thing to ask. Why? Iruka was silent for several long minutes and then he spoke, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry, if I had done a better job. I'll run. Naruto stared at the man he'd come to view as half brother and half father. Part of him understood what Iruka meant, understood the feelings those eyes full of tears showed. The other part couldn't. He turned scrambling to his feet as he took off, the scroll slapping against his back, ignoring Mizuki's shout. He had to get away, had to think. Why had everything turned out like this? All Naruto had ever wanted was to be a ninja. And now he was running away like a scared little kid. Why are you running? Just die, it's not like anybody will mourn. Mizuki shouted from behind him. Naruto continued to run through a forest blurred with his tears. He always thought the same thing, that on the surface the village always looked so peaceful. The Sandaime was not that naive, however. He had been alive for far too long to believe that. He had seen the closing of the Shodai and Nidaime Hokage's lives. He'd seen the rise and death of even his own successor against the terrible demon fox. In the distance he could hear the sound of various Jonin moving quietly, some shouting that they needed to find and kill Naruto. Yes, things were happening again, and it appeared he might have to lose yet another precious leaf of konoha. Why had Naruto stolen the scroll? Could it be he had really been a spy planted so many years ago just to this purpose? Turning, he stared over his shoulder at the closed door leading into his office. Kakashi-san. Seconds later he was greeted with the presence of the masked, one-eyed man. Well. An UNBU patrol noticed Mizuki moving out of the village, quickly carrying a scroll. Kakashi answered blandly. At the time we didn't know that it was the forbidden scroll. He's a teacher after all, and they assumed it was something to do with the academy. Mizuki was plotting to frame Naruto in the theft of the scroll. It would be foolish to take a forbidden scroll without checking to see if it was trapped. I think, if I'm correct, that Mizuki planted the scroll in a prearranged place that he knew Naruto would go. The boy would of course read the scroll and set off any traps inside. Mizuki was never a foolish one. Sandaime said, puffing on his pipe. Iruka was heading toward the forest when he found out. Do you think that he might know where Naruto would be if he was training? More than likely. Kakashi agreed. I has a team already closing in. This whole matter will be resolved in a matter of minutes. The Hokage frowned, then shook his head. Let Naruto and Iruka handle this as much as possible. I only want your team to interfere if there is no other choice. Of course. Kakashi said, his tone sounding less than enthusiastic, but he quietly retreated from the office, leaving the Hokage alone. Sandaime sighed, popping his neck absently before clasping hands behind his neck and moving back to the window to stare out over the village. Was he taking too large a gamble that a genin and an almost inexperienced school teacher could beat a man good enough to steal a scroll from the Hokage's private office? Probably. But Sandaime had this feeling, there was something large on the horizon, and for the foreseeable future he would have to bank on Naruto. Sighing, the old man closed his eyes, wondering what his own teachers would have done. There was no telling really, and in all honesty, he was probably getting ahead of himself. First, Naruto would have to not only survive the night, but show an incredible skill to merit graduation from the academy. Something that would allow him to avoid becoming a civilian, yet somehow the Sandaime didn't think that would be a problem. Unconsciously he mused about getting her to the job as Naruto's sensei, since the other teams were already formed. Konoha's #1 troublemaker and Konoha's #1 most sadistic Kwanichi alone on the same time. That would be entertaining to say the least. The forest was still and calm, glowing almost eerily in the moonlight. A few nocturnal animals prowled silently, searching for prey. They froze only as the solitary figure dashed overhead, silently going above and then below branches. He was moving faster than a regular human could run on the ground, and his passage just barely disturbed the stray leaves in the trees. He was pushing himself, searching desperately, with his heart pounding in his ears. How had things gone like this? He had it planned so perfectly. It shouldn't have collapsed like this. But it was okay. He could improvise, adapt. Nobody would know. No way could they know. First he'd kill that bastard, and then he'd remove the other moron, then he could arrange things perfectly. Naruto had killed Iruka, The scroll is gone, most likely destroyed in the fight. So sad, but it was alright because the traitor would be dead, Iruka would be a hero, and the Yondem scroll would be his. Mizuki allowed himself a rare real smile of pleasure. Things could still work out perfectly, there was nothing to worry about, nothing at all. Ahead he caught sight of a pale orange jumpsuit. Naruto had some real speed. Mizuki smirked, there was no use denying that if Naruto lived he would amount to something decent. Too bad he was going to die in this forest tonight. Mizuki paced him for a moment, and then sped up, zipping up even with the boy on the right side knowing his hand to look like Iruka was flawless. Naruto. The boy turned in mid-leap, his gaze distrusting but hopeful. Hurry. Pass me the scroll. Mizuki Iruka said urgently, trying to look concerned even as he moved ahead of the boy slightly. Mizuki is after it. Naruto stopped, crouching down, and Mizuki turned in mid-leap wondering what was up. Naruto pushed off the tree branch and Mizuki was caught in mid-air by a flying shoulder and forced into an uncontrolled dive, snapping branches as he descended rapidly. Mizuki grunted as he smashed into the ground and skidded to a stop. Pushing himself onto his hands and knees he turned to glare at Naruto who was falling back against a tree breathing heavily. Why? Naruto. Letting his hand fade, Mizuki glared at the boy. How did you know I wasn't Iruka? Mizuki was taken back when Naruto suddenly smiled while chuckling. Then even as he climbed back to his feet he was greeted with Naruto disappearing in a puff of smoke to reveal a smiling and bloodied Iruka. Because I'm Iruka. Mizuki froze for a moment, then smiled faintly. How foolish, he should have noticed the difference in the way they moved. Naruto pushed off with the balls of his feet while Iruka did so with the heels. You really care enough to give your own life for that brat? Iruka closed his eyes, bleeding heavily. I won't hand the scroll over to an idiot like you. Mizuki blinked then laughed, shaking his head. How stupid could someone get? You're an idiot, Naruto and I are the same. If you use the skill in that scroll, you can do whatever you want. Grinning he spread his hands laughing. Yeah. You can. Iruka said faintly, catching Mizuki by surprise. Iruka was agreeing with him. That had never happened before. Could the man be trying something? What could he do? Iruka was on his last legs. Naruto isn't the same as you do. He'll use it to protect this village. Hey, you keep thinking that. Mizuki allowed, shrugging. Why not just run? When you first took it? Iruka asked, his eyes almost out of focus. Oh. The truth is I wanted to make sure the techniques on the scroll weren't booby-trapped. Mizuki grinned viciously. I figure who better than the dead last student from the academy to test and make sure it wasn't dangerous. You just happened to come along before I could arrive and take it back. Iruka grunted, bracing himself against the tree trunk, shaking his head. Cowardly. But you're wrong. Naruto isn't. I've acknowledged him as one of my excellent students. He may be clumsy, so no one accepts him, and he might pull pranks. But he knows what it is to feel the pain of loneliness in your heart. Mizuki felt his eye twitching. Iruka was using his last breath to defend that little prick. What sort of sense did that make? He is a member of the Hidden Leaf Village, and its #1 troublemaker, he's Uzumaki Naruto. Mizuki sighed, shaking his head. He shouldn't be surprised, really. Iruka was always such a blind idealistic moron. Even back when they were in the academy together, of course that could be why the others would pick on him. Not that it mattered anymore, so he'd just chalk this up to a difference in opinion. Whatever. Iruka, I know I said I would take care of you later, but I've changed my mind. Unstrapping the giant shuriken, Mizuki narrowed his eyes, hurry up and die. That shouted, Mizuki darted forward, the shuriken spinning perfectly like he had always practiced. 10 feet, 5. 4. He could already see Iruka's mutilated body, and that was what cost him the chance to kill the man. He had been too caught up in his own fantasy and had missed the inrush of orange until it was too late. 1 minute his gaze was locked on Iruka, the next a blue shoe was smashing into his cheek, forcing him to release his shuriken while he twisted and sailed back once more to crash into the earth. He bounced several times in his skid until he came to a stop and Mizuki could taste the tint of copper in his mouth. How dare that bastard attack him? How dare Naruto make him bleed? Pushing himself up slightly he turned his gaze upon the boy, eyes dark with anger. You should not have done that. Don't touch Iruka-sensei. Naruto said while he slammed the scroll into the ground, so that it was standing upright. Mizuki watched as the boy lowered his head, focusing on him. Mizuki felt something inside him shiver in fear of what he didn't know. "I'll kill you. You idiot. Why did you come out? Run away." Oka shouted before falling in a coughing fit. Surprisingly, that was all it took to fire Mizuki out of his cowardly fear. "Shut up. A little punk like you I'll kill in one shot." He was taken back, however, when Naruto in response narrowed his eyes while moving his fingers into an unfamiliar seal. "Try it, trash." Even Mizuki could tell there was no bravado in that voice. This was an entirely different Naruto than anything he'd ever dealt with. But Mizuki refused to back down, refused to believe that the boy could actually be a danger to him. "You want to try a jutsu? Then do it." Seconds later, as the boy's chakra began to explode, Mizuki wondered for a moment if the boy had used the scroll and if he had which skill he had learned. Then he noticed the chakra had a slightly different feel to it. It almost felt more mature. Tavi Cave Bunshine no Jutsu. Mizuki suddenly did not feel so confident. Everywhere he looked there was a Naruto. He was trapped in a sea of orange, and somehow he didn't think these were just illusions. "What's wrong? Come at me," said one of the clones, who was hanging upside down. "Weren't you going to kill me with one shot?" Another taunted, and Mizuki could only look around in confusion and mounting fear. "Well then," another one added, grinning darkly, "I'll start things off." Another finished arm pulled back through a punch and a cocky smile in place. Mizuki wasn't sure what happened, wasn't sure of anything except that he was now getting beat into coma by 1,000 Narutos, and none of them seemed to be holding back. He was never so grateful for unconsciousness as when it finally washed over him. Sadly, his blissful escape was populated by orange and yellow demons. Did anyone find him? No. Damn it. This is bad. He may be far away by now. The Sandaime shook his head, glancing at Kakashi, who was casually leaning against a wall in the darkness. He offered a slight nod, and the Hokage smiled smugly, turning to address the panicking Jonin. "There is nothing to worry about." He found it funny how fast his soft voice could bring such a stunned silence to a group of panicking ninja. "Hokage-sama." Sandaime was silent for a moment, puffing on his pipe, thinking. It looked like he was going to use her after all. That made him quite happy. Hopefully she would not turn out like her own sensei. Still, she should jump at the chance to teach, if he asked nicely. Better soothe these almost rabid baboons first, so they don't kill Naruto on sight. He'll be back soon, with the real thief and Oka-san. He saw the looks they were sending him, and he could only close his eyes and puff a little more on his pipe. "You can go home now." They hesitated, then slowly they turned, taking off, leaving the Hokage alone with the Unbu commander, who calmly walked over to join him while reading his book. Kakashi stopped within arm's reach, not saying a word, and the Sandaime contented himself to stare up at the stars overhead before speaking to the masked man. "Well, he is interesting. Preliminary report says that Naruto not only learned a forbidden technique, but used it with surprising results to defeat Mizuki." Kakashi looked up from his book, raising an eyebrow, while still looking incredible tired. "I told the team to wait until the two were clear of the area. I am curious. What now?" "Now," Sandaime mused, smiling to himself, before glancing at the silver-haired masked man. "Now, I get to see Anko-chan about a teaching job." "You wouldn't, you would." Kakashi deadpanned, before shaking his head. "Naruto is unusual. He will need an unusual teacher. Besides, you've got enough on your plate." "Yes." Seconds later, Sandaime was alone, hands clasped behind his back and blowing smoke rings into the brightening sky, musing about life beyond him and Naruto. Oka leaned his head back against the tree trunk, concentrating on his breath. He didn't think he had any internal injuries or bleeding, but there was no telling. The important thing, however, was that he would not be dying anytime soon. This meant he could consider the blonde, who was staring at him worriedly. Oka did owe Naruto, but there was only so much he could do. Naruto had failed the graduation test, and passing the boy into the official ninja ranks would utterly irresponsible. Yet this was the last year that Naruto could even try for it, and the blonde had met the minimum requirements. There was no questioning that. Still, there was one thing Oka couldn't help with. Naruto sucked at illusion. It'd be a huge liability to send him into the field. So what could Iruka do? The Hokage would never let Naruto pass if he couldn't complete that last step. But then again, Naruto had just split into over 1,000 real bunshines right before his eyes. Could that count? Iruka frowned, considering that real clones over illusions would make him much less of a liability. Then Iruka winced, one of his wounds flaring up. Well, they might revoke Naruto's graduation to genin, but to a few hours he could let the boy know his brother. He realized with a start, experience what it was like to be a real ninja. Now the only problem was where to get a forehead protector. That and the fact that Naruto kept asking if he was okay. Close your eyes. Seeing the hesitation, Iruka narrowed his eyes, frightening the boy into doing just that. Biting back a yelp of pain, Iruka reached up and removed his own forehead protector. The cloth was faded, and the plate was nicked, and not nearly as pristine as the others. Naruto might not even like it and demand his own forehead protector, but it would do for the moment. Moving onto his knees, ignoring the pain that raced through his body, he reached up and removed Naruto's goggles before slipping the forehead protector in place. Satisfied, he collapsed back against the tree. Sensei now. Naruto sounded so anxious. Okay, you can open your eyes, Iruka said, plastering a smile on his face. There was no use in letting Naruto know just how hurt he really was. Congratulations on graduating. Naruto's face registered shock at first and then surprise. Let's celebrate. I'll buy you a bowl of ramen. Iruka almost thought Naruto was going to shout or cry. Instead he sort of smiled, and Iruka prepared himself to give a lecture, which might be his last considering his wounds minus, about how the hard part of being a shinobi was just starting. Naruto, however, had different plans. The blonde lunged forward, embracing him in a bone-crunching hug. Well, Iruka would just save that lecture for the ramen place. Chapter 2. Sensei. Naruto was one of the few shinobi that was actually a deep sleeper. A very deep sleeper. A fact that had earned him the ire of many of his classmates, who had borne the brunt of Iruka's resulting lectures on the importance of punctuality and consideration to a shinobi. Iruka, being the practical teacher he was, had understood that lectures to the class were not a complete solution, which was how Naruto received his first alarm clock. It was a rather banged-up device, but it served, every morning, to fill the air of Naruto's apartment with shrill beeps and buzzes. The question, however, was if Naruto could actually hear the racket it created while sleeping. Although many of his neighbors would argue to the contrary, the answer was yes, he could indeed hear it, though most of the time he did his best to ignore it. Rolling over, he slapped his hand blindly all over the place before finally silencing the offending noise. Rolling over again, he sat up, yawned, and tried to force his eyes to open completely, which was really a losing battle. Still, he dragged himself out of bed and, ignoring the shower for the moment, stumbled his way into the kitchen. Stubbing his toes against a battered table leg, he cursed while fumbling with his second-hand fridge for his milk. He spent another minute or so waiting at his equally battered looking toaster and then sat down sleepily, stumbling his way through breakfast, brushing the odd taste of the milk off as well. Now relatively awake, he climbed back to his feet and stumbled back into his bedroom to change clothes. Was there anything as lovely as orange? Naruto didn't think so. He had gotten it from a second-hand store and wore it proudly, along with his goggles. After a second's consideration, he finally removed them and reluctantly set them aside, picking up the forehead protector he had received only 2 nights ago. A shiver of excitement ran down his spine as he admired the leaf symbol that adorned his forehead protector. His forehead protector, the realization struck him again. He had graduated. After years of trying but being ignored and looked down upon, he had been acknowledged for something other than making trouble. Of course, his graduation method had been a little unconventional, but hell, he was Uzumaki Naruto, the master of surprises. He was an official ninja, and now he had to get his butt in gear to reach the academy as ordered. Trying the blue piece of cloth in place, he took one more look in the mirror, thinking he really did look rather dashing. Grinning happily, he turned rushing out of his apartment, wondering what was ahead of him. He picked up speed quickly, darting through the almost empty streets of his neighborhood, but all too soon he hit the shopping district and the crowds there were almost impossible to avoid. Taking a shortcut, he darted down a back alley, knowing that he was going to be late unless he could remove some obstacles. This meant creating a cave bunshine and using it to leap upwards onto the roof of a building with an unbelievable racket, but still not slowing down. He couldn't be late. Desperate to an edge, Naruto attempted to gather chakra to the bottom of his feet as he quickly charged the edge of the roof. It worked rather well actually. He managed a super jump. but forgot just how much chakra he had gathered at his feet, and he had far too much momentum. This meant, when he came down, he did so through the roof of a shop. A shop that belonged to Matsushima, who happened to be working and remembered Naruto. Seconds later, Naruto was tearing out of the shop, with pieces of pottery shattering while the heavy-set man tried to kill him. Naruto thankfully escaped death, and darted out of the shop, around the last few shoppers, and went into a dead sprint towards the academy where someone was already ushering in the last of the new genin. Pouring on an extra burst of speed, he shouted to the man to wait, which of course he did. Which resulted in Naruto slamming into the man and bringing them both to the ground. Leaving the poor fellow laying there groaning, Naruto scrambled to his feet, tearing off down the hallway, his feet almost flying from under him as he rounded corners and tried to come to a dead stop at the door leading to his classroom. Thankfully, he caught the door before one of his classmates closed it, and panting, he calmly walked through the gawking crowd toward his seat in the middle row. Laughing in satisfaction, he propped his chin on his arms. He was a ninja. An honest, full-blown ninja. After 3 years, he had finally managed to graduate, which meant he was one more step closer to his dream of becoming Hokage. He could already see it, dressed in orange Hokage robes and adored by everyone in the village. He would leave the hat alone to tradition. If the hat was good enough for the Yondem, then Naruto could accept it. He was somewhere in mid-fantasy about a certain girl fawning over him while he was served bowl after bowl of free ramen. Ho! Naruto, what the hell you doing here? Sitting up, he glared at the boy. Can't you see the head protector? HN. The boy leaned in close. Sorta dinged and scratched. You didn't dig that out of a garbage can, did you? Why you? Naruto growled, preparing to kill the boy, when a new voice piped up. Hey, will you let me through? Naruto glanced in the direction of the voice and felt his heart leap. Orange was his favorite color, there was no doubt, but a close second was pink. Especially the shade of pink found in Sakura's hair, it just seemed to stand out so perfectly. A close third was green, the same shade as her eyes. Kami, what he wouldn't give for just one kiss from her. Wait. Could she want to sit next to him? Suddenly her beautiful face transformed into a horrible mockery of her earlier perfection as she tapped a finger at him, her voice rising in pitch. Naruto. Move your ass. I want to sit next to Sasuke-kun. Jerking back from that, Naruto turned, narrowing his gaze on his roommate. There, sitting quietly with his chin propped on his hands looking as cool as ever, was the great Sasuke. Naruto hated that boy with a passion, always perfect marks. Everyone loved him and respected him. Sasuke seemed to notice his attention and raised an eyebrow. What? What do you mean what? Naruto shouted only to, has his face forcibly planted into the desktop by Sakura. Sasuke-kun, can I sit next to you? Her voice sounded so sickeningly loving. It was almost enough to make even Naruto resent it. 10 minutes later, Naruto was scowling straight ahead. Sakura was fawning silently over Sasuke, who was staring ahead with a detached coolness. Naruto definitely hated the boy. He just couldn't get it. What did Sasuke has that he didn't? Snorting in disgust, Naruto looked away and smacked his face against the desktop. Whatever team he was assigned to, he just prayed it would not have Sasuke. He would have to seriously consider suicide if he did. Thankfully, Iruka showed up before Naruto could get too far along such dark trails of thought. The man was still sporting a few bandages and seemed to have a mild limp, but he smiled anyway. Beginning today, all of you are real ninja, but you are still only genins. The hard part is just starting. Iruka paused, looking over the interested crowd while Naruto could only beam brightly and almost vibrate with pent-up energy. He was a ninja. Low level or not, he was a genin and he would quickly rise. He was even preparing to shout something to that effect when Iruka continued his speech. Now you will soon be assigned duties by the village, which means that today is the day we give you your 3-man teams. Each of you will get a Jonin sensei and you will follow that sensei's instructions as you complete your assigned duties. There was much murmuring at this, but Naruto tuned it out, forming his own dream team in his mind. It mostly consisted of Sakura and another pretty girl, who would look upon him as a great hero and ignore Sasuke. He started blushing as his little dream advanced to something he was only vaguely aware existed. We tried to balance each team's strength, which means some long-standing traditions are being set aside for this year's teams. Iruka said among several kids shouting in annoyance. Naruto didn't care. Just as long as he was free from Sasuke, he would be decently happy. Team 10 will be Nara Shikamaru, Hyuga Hinata and Akimikai Chovy. Team 7 will be Hano Sakura, Inuzuka Kiba and Uchiha Sasuke. Here Oka paused while several girls revolted. Sakura celebrated and Naruto hung his head in despair. How? How could this injustice happen? Team 9 Yamap Anzai Yamanaka INO and Abaim Shino. Team minus. He was supposed to have Sakura on his team. What cruel gods had he pissed off this week for this to happen? Several more teams were rattled off as he moped, unable to believe that fate and Oka could punish him so soundly for no reason. How could they do this to him? He kicks Mizuki's ass and this was his thanks. It was decided then, since Naruto could not get back at fate, that he would get back at Oka. As of now, Oka would has itching powder in his clothes for this injustice. Okay, my final words as your sensei. Oka cleared his throat, his tone serious. Don't assume how good you are based on your academy scores, nor think you know everything about someone. Seeing the serious looks reflected back at them, he finished. So congratulations on becoming ninja. This afternoon we'll introduce your Jonin sensei. Until then you're free. It wasn't until he was the only one left in the room that he realized that he had never heard who his team was. That he had no clue what to do. At this, he jumped to his feet, eyes wide in panic as he grabbed his hair and paced frantically. No. No. If he didn't know who his team would be and didn't show up, they might decided to put him back into the academy or make him a civilian. As each second passed, he felt his anxiety rise another notch, almost to the point that he was about to pull his hair out as he mumbled no continuously. Naruto. Turning, the blonde released his hair and stared at the scared Jonin, who was staring at him curiously. Oi. What about me? Huh. Don't I get a team? Oh. Oka said, scratching his nose. Oh. It's not that you don't has a team, Naruto, it's just that because of your unique graduation the Hokage has had to plan something very special for you. Oh. Naruto deadpanned. Now how about that ramen? 20 seconds later, he was dragging Oka toward his favorite ramen stand. Mitarashi Anko was pleased. This meant she was cheerful and smiling. This meant that every ninja she had met since her return from her last A-ranked mission was terrified of her. Not because Anko appeared evil or mean, but rather because Anko carried an aura about her which told people intuitively that Mitarashi Anko should not be smiling. Ever. Anko, however, was smiling and she was cheerful and she swore that nothing could ruin her day. She should have known better than to think that. It was a rule of nature. Upon entering the Hokage tower, she beamed at one of the office workers, who paled and hurriedly sped past. This caused Anko to only widen her grin, moving smoothly to the mission hall to turn in her report and receive her next mission or pay. Stepping into the room, she stopped short, finding Oka behind a desk, sorting missions. He did not even look up at her entrance, which gave Anko a moment to consider the man. They had been in the same academy graduating class, yet where she had went to study under one of the most twisted individuals on the planet, he had gotten a normal sensei. Anko's grin went up another notch. Oka suddenly froze, as a deer might, when it sensed a predator. He remained perfectly still, not even his brush moving, as Anko's footsteps echoed across the empty mission hall. It was not until she reached the table he sat at and had leaned a hip against it that he moved. Anko was pleased to see the way his eyes bugged out and he stammered. It meant her choice in wearing only a fishnet shirt and miniskirt was still a good idea. Hiya. Anko chirped happily, almost lazily dropping her mission report on the table in front him. Hi. Oka managed, and then coughing looked back down, quickly shifting through the papers. How was the mission? Great. Anko beamed, putting a hand on her hip. You wouldn't believe the dango they has in Waterfall. It'd be a nice vacation spot. I'm sure it would be. Oka managed without stammering. Anko leaned forward slightly, allowing her trench coat to fall open even more for a more nosebleed-inducing view. Aren't you normally teaching? Aye. Oka trailed off and then averted his gaze back to the paper on the desk, which had dots of blood from his nosebleed. Ahem. I've been transferred to assigning missions to the Hokage. Ooh. Anko cooed coyly, walking her fingers across the paper to dip them in his blood and then leaned back, finger coming near her mouth. Aren't you just moving right on up there? I, he stammered. Swallowing, Oka looked up and with a Herculean effort, met her gaze. It's only temporary. Until the next academy session starts. Taking a deep break, he continued, the Hokage would like to see you. I'll make sure that payment is placed in your account. Smiling sweetly, Anko licked her finger clean before winking at him. Thanks. Seeing the look on his face, she laughed, completely enjoying the discomfort she caused the man. Turning, she sauntered back out of the mission hall, where her entire demeanor changed once more. Suddenly she was no longer pleasant or playful, she was all business. The Hokage never wanted to see her unless it was something important. Normally she operated solely on the complete mission get new mission minus complete it minus get new one method. Partly because that had been how she had been trained, and partly because she couldn't stand most of the villagers with their mixture of disgust and sympathy whenever she was around. Reaching the spiraling staircase, she literally jumped up the stairs, almost knocking officer workers off as she climbed higher and higher. Anko could not help but wonder if maybe this might be an S-ranked mission. Anko hoped so. She wanted one just to keep that bastard Kakashi from rubbing it in her face that she was the only special Jonin that had not done one yet. How anyone could stand that bastard she had no idea, he was just too smug. Unbu commander, or not, she would teach him a lesson, somehow, someway. She also probably hated him for the fact that Kakashi had turned her down to a date when she was a genin, but she wasn't sure. Reaching the topmost floor of the tower, she kicked the door open and landed in a crouch, her trench coat fluttering behind her. Sadly, there was no one to appreciate her appearance, or at least no one she could see. It did not take a genius to know that Unbu would be all over her if she tried anything. Sighing, she strode down the short hallway toward the door at the far end. Without hesitating, she pushed the door open, talking without looking around. Yo, old bastard. The Hokage looked up from his desk, an eyebrow twitching at the remark, but smiling anyway. H. Anko-chan, how nice to see you again. Yay yay. Anko waved dismissively, walking across the room to plop down in a chair across from the old man. So what did you want to see me about? I has a mission for you. Possibly the most difficult mission of your career. Sandame said, his tone and demeanor serious. Anko sat up straight at that, just barely able to keep from bouncing like a hyper monkey. She knew it. An S-ranked mission. At last. I'll take it. Don't you want to know the exact details minus? I said I'd take it, so I'm taking it. Anko cut the old man off, her face flush with excitement. So where do I go? Who's on my team? What's the target? Sandame chuckled as he sifted through the papers on his desk and selected a folder, tossing it at her. Standing, he turned and walked to a large window that looked out over the village. That, I believe, will explain everything. Ho. Anko said, cautiously opening the folder. After a few minutes, she jumped to her feet. What the hell are you playing at? A genin. An S-ranked mission needs experienced Jonin. There's not even a briefing for the mission. S-ranked. Sandame repeated, turning to look at her curiously. Oh. Next time please let me explain a mission before you accept. Seeing her eye twitching, he grinned smugly. This is not a ranked mission. It is a teaching assignment. What? Anko shrieked. How could this happen to her? How? As of now, you are the Jonin sensor of Uzumaki Naruto. Sandame said, sounding completely amused. As you has already accepted, I am afraid you cannot reject it now. But. Anko stammered, staring at the old man while her hopes all came crashing down around her. But. Now. Why don't you take a look at his record? Sandame said soothingly, moving his hand as if to calm her. I'm sure you'll be back up to A-ranked missions in no time. What does that? Anko trailed off, before she narrowed her eyes, her tone full of venom. I hate you. You are not the first. Sandame admitted before turning back toward the window. Anko, hands trembling, turned her gaze back to the folder, reading it disgustedly. She hated academy records. They were a joke, and more than a few people had ruined their careers by depending on these things. Snorting, she looked at the Hokage's back darkly. Well? He asked, sounding as if he was musing about something. Well, if I was stupid enough to just go by the academy records. Anko muttered, looking at the opened file once more before glancing at the Sandame's back. I'd say this Naruto is just barely above a villager. Sandame was silent for a moment, then chuckled. True. So what do you really think of your student? My student? Anko repeated distastefully, dropping the folder. There's never been an Uzumaki in this village, so I don't really know, Anko mused. I'll probably kill him in his sleep. Actually, a few people, like Iruka and Kakashi, has mentioned he's a bit like you. Sundame said, humor lacing his words. Anko could not help but snort at that, crossing her arms. So can I ask why the hell I've been singled out? Any damn Jonin could teach this brat. And why just one? Don't you usually put genin on 3-man teams? If I has to teach, don't you think I am good enough to has a full team? Sundame drew a breath through his pipe as he glanced at the woman who stood fuming before his desk. Looking again out the window of his office, he slowly spoke. Naruto was not a part of this year's original graduating class. The circumstances surrounding his graduation are somewhat atypical. As such, he was not accounted for when the genin teams were originally put together. Incorporating him into one of the existing teams would be difficult, so it was decided that this arrangement would be more appropriate. Chuckling to himself as if he had just remembered some old folk, the Sundame continued, in fact I think Naruto will do much better as an apprentice than in a genin team. The boy has a lot of potential for independent action, just like you did. At this, Sundame turned to stare at her, his expression serious. The other 9 all has above average Jonin sensei's. This boy, I am expecting extraordinary things from him, so I needed an appropriate sensei. 9. Anko asked, allowing the compliment to roll off her back. If you recall, graduating from the academy is not the final step to becoming a genin. Each Jonin sensei has the right to challenge their new students with a test of their own design before accepting them. This year a full 27 academy students passed the academy graduation exam, but of these I only expect 9 to be accepted by their assigned Jonin sensei's. If Naruto passes your test, that would make 10. Sundame said, puffing on his pipe. Those that remain will be the best of their year. I think, however, that your student will be the most highly regarded. Anko closed her eyes, fighting to keep from blowing up on the man. Murder of a Hokage was frowned on. Sometimes justified, but frowned on. Still, there was this test. She could probably devise something that would guarantee her freedom from this assignment very soon. Not that that made her any happier. Well, that's it. He will be looking for you at the academy soon. Sundame said in obvious dismissal. I still don't get it. Anko muttered, shaking her head. Why me? If I told you, then Kakashi-san would have to has you removed. Sundame said in a low, serious tone. Anko was silent for a moment, then scowling she bowed and prepared to leave the Sudame's office. She could tell when the Hokage was voking or trying to provoke her, and so it was clear that this had not been an idle threat. Which meant whatever was brewing was important, highly dangerous, and likely to be a lot of fun. Anko turned to leave, then suddenly spun back, faced the Sundame. Assuming I accept him, I am not going to be taking any stupid D-ranked missions just because of this brat. I want B ranked or higher. B ranked is beyond what you can expect of a genin. You said he had a lot of potential. Afraid he is not as good as you might think. Hell, I was doing A ranked missions when I was his age. If he is really worth my time, he should at least be able to handle something B ranked. The Sundame scowled at this for a moment, until a mischievous smile spread across his face. I will agree to only assign you B ranked or higher missions on the conditions that you agree to train Naruto full-time, until you believe he can handle being on a B ranked mission. Anko smiled and nodded at this. You will also promise me that you will keep him alive through his first 2 B or higher ranked missions. Whatever Anko thought to herself, she would try, but accidents happen, and finally, if you cannot keep your promise, then you agree to take a 1-year teaching assignment at the academy as Iruka's new assistant. Anko paled as the Sundame finished explaining his conditions. His smile had widened as he had spoken until there was a broad grin on his face. Clearly he was pleased with himself. A year at the academy and working under that Chunin boy. Would he really be that cruel? Of course, you could always just accept a series of D and C ranked missions like the other genin teams. Now, if Anko had been anything other than a trained kunoichi, she might have been caught by the dilemma posed by the Hokage. Danger, however, had an effect on her mind, similar to the effect of adrenaline on the body. It pushed her thoughts into overdrive, heightening her perception and creativity. Within a moment she had her solution. Shaking the image of a room full of prepubescent morons being instructed by a post-pubescent idiot out of her head, Anko rationalized to herself, it didn't really matter what she agreed to. It was not like the kid had any chance of passing the test that she had just devised to him. This assignment would be over before the end of the day. Smiling devilishly to herself at this thought, she responded, "All right then, I agree to your terms." "Good." The Sandaime said, "You had better go to the academy now. I am sure your new student is eager to meet his new sensei." Anko left the room with the devilish grin still on her face as she thought about the test she would give Naruto. Chuckling to herself. It was perfect. It would make that bell test some of the Jonin favored look like a walk in the park. Forget passing, Naruto would be lucky to stay alive. Naruto peeked out the door, his gaze growing disgruntled. What kind of sensei would be so damn late? Slamming the door with a thud, Naruto paced the empty classroom, grumbling and wondering what was going on. Iruka had assured him over Ramen that there was indeed a sensei coming for him. Naruto had been ecstatic he had a sensei. A private sensei even, nobody else could be around to make him look bad or to outperform him. Naruto stopped and rubbed his hands together gloatingly. First he'd sharpen his skills up and then he'd quickly get so good that he could outshine that bastard Sasuke. Then Sakura would notice him. Chuckling, he lost himself in his daydream until he heard something that sounded like footsteps, which meant he whipped around and rushed to the door, yanking it open, only to find the hallway empty. Damn it. Slamming the door once more, he started pacing, wondering what could keep his sensei from being here on time. Maybe they were important and had to do a bunch of things. Naruto nodded, pondering that. Yes, it would fit. The Hokage was usually late whenever he spoke to them during the academy. Suddenly he froze, eyes wide. What if his sensei was the Hokage? He started whooping and jumping around, acting like a complete idiot. Then he realized that no, the Hokage probably wouldn't be his sensei, and he deflated until he crumpled to the floor to stare hatefully at the door. Why is my sensei so damn late? Crossing his arms, he looked away, eyes appearing closed. All the other teams has gone off with their teachers. Naruto muttered. Even Iruka sensei left. Maybe whoever they had selected thought he wasn't worth the effort, that they were too good for him. He wallowed in his funk for a moment, until he decided to punish the bastard. Hopping to his feet, he eyed the classroom before spotting an eraser. Grinning, he snatched it up, and then jumped onto a table beside the doorway, carefully wedging the eraser between the door and the doorframe. Hopping down, he chuckled, rubbing his hands together. Hair. This is what they get for being late. Eyes roaming, his mind started designing another step for his prank, smiling a bit like a trickster fox from a story. Suddenly remembering that Iruka kept glue in the bottom drawer of his desk, Naruto hurried over and retrieved said item. Grinning evilly, Naruto moved to the spot in front of the doorway and applied the liquid. Emptying the bottle, he grinned, wondering what else he could do. This prank needed something extra. Something for that added oomph. Crossing his arms as he thought about it, he nodded, snapping his fingers. Aloud, in a gloating tone, he said of course. And turned as if to retrieve whatever item he had thought of. Unfortunately, he had been so caught up in his prank on the teacher that had dared think he was too good to teach Naruto. The blonde had not noticed someone enter the room and move in behind him. Coming face to face with an adult, who was staring at him oddly, startled Naruto so bad that he stumbled backward and tripped. Landing but first in the glue and barring the door, so the eraser hit him on the head. Naruto quickly tried to get back to his feet, but found that he was stuck, even his hands minus cursing soundly. Naruto looked up at the person that had startled him, surprised to find the black-haired woman laughing at him. He even managed to ignore the fact that she was wearing a long trench coat, fishnet shirt and a barely legal skirt. Still, he couldn't help that his cheeks were burning from embarrassment. Who the hell are you? Naruto questioned loudly, to give him a chance to recover some dignity. The woman let her laughter trail away, though she continued to chuckle. I'm Mitarashi Anko. Your new sensei. I'm going to kill that old man Hokage, or not. Naruto grumbled, unable to believe that Iruka would have any part in selecting his new sensei. If the man had, Iruka would have given him a sensei better suited to Naruto's level. Anko, however, grinned. He was shorter than she expected, looked underfed too. His clothes seemed second-hand, and his hair. Had it ever seen a comb? Those whiskers on his face looked natural, yet he wasn't an Inuzuka. Well, she didn't see anything that made her think he was anything special. Well, maybe his eyes. They were definitely determined enough. Sighing, Anko reclined against the railing behind her, eyeing the genin, who in turn eyed her very intently, almost too intently to be comfortable. What made it worse was the fact that he was not ogling her body. He was judging her as a ninja. Okay, The book said that I should ask about your dreams and all that. Book. Naruto blinked. Yay. Anko grinned, rubbing at the back of her neck. This is my first time. Hair. Well, not that first time, but you know what I mean. Naruto looked lost. So, anyway. Anko chirped before jabbing a finger at Naruto. What is your dream? To surpass the Hokages. Naruto shouted, reaching up to touch his forehead protector. Oh, and to invent 1-minute instant ramen. Cause waiting 3 minutes is horrible. Dango's better. Anko said dismissively, preparing to move on with her test when Naruto interrupted her. Ramen. Dango. Anko shouted back, for no other reason than to argue. Ramen. Naruto shouted, jumping to his feet. Dango. How can you resist the mouth-watering sweet perfection of ramen? Naruto demanded, crossing his arms. Especially miso ramen. There is nothing better than sweet, enticing Dango. Anko said, defending her food of choice while narrowing her eyes. It was a stupid argument, but damn it, the boy was pushing her buttons. Didn't he know that she was more than willing to skin him alive and hang him upside down by his toes? Both continued to glare at each other, bodies tensed as if preparing for an attack should the other insult their food choice again. Finally, Anko mastered herself, remembering that he would be dead soon, and relaxed, rolling her eyes. Whatever. That's right. Naruto shouted, nodding decisively. You know ramen is better than Dango. Anko felt her eye twitch, and without meaning to, launched a kunai at the boy, which grazed his cheek. The look on his face was priceless, and she believed he might have actually wet himself. That shut you up. Oi. Naruto shouted, glaring at her. Are you completely insane? Throwing kunai around like they're toys. That could have killed me. Be thankful my aim's slipping, runt. Anko retorted angrily. Runt. Naruto shouted, starting to charge toward her. I'm going to minus whatever he was going to do, he never got to say, since before he could continue she was behind him, a hand firmly clamped over his mouth and a kunai against his throat. Obviously talking with Naruto like a rational human being was out of the question. Dropping her former pleasantness, she allowed her more murderous side to emerge, which consisted of an intense killing intent and a sadistic streak in her voice. First off, I am not a sensei. I did not ask to be a sensei and I don't want to be one. I have spent the last 12 years performing A-ranked missions. Understand? Naruto nodded faintly and Anko pressed a little harder with the kunai. Second off, there were 27 graduates. Only a handful will actually remain genin. The others are sent back to the academy and in your case turned out into the civilian population. We decide who stays and who goes purely on a test that your sensei decides. Anko paused, smiling. Unfortunately for you, I don't like genin. And the test I has an almost zero survival rate. Letting go, she saw the boy move away from her before turning around to glare at her. Screw you. The blonde shouted, only to make an eep sound, when a kunai passed within inches of his head, taking a lock of his hair. Careful, little boy, you'll die before you even get to try my mission. Anko grinned, seeing the determined if angry look on the boy's face. Oh. This would be fun. I want you to steal a particular book from a ninja named Kakashi. He has silver hair and wears a mask. The book is called Ika Paradise, and he will probably be reading it if you find him. Oi. I know that book. It's a naughty book. Naruto shouted, eyes wide. You has 3 hours 2.5 you spent waiting for me to arrive. Anko said, ignoring Naruto's outburst. Then crossing her arms, narrowed her eyes. If you do manage to somehow not only survive but bring me said book within the time limit, I will accept you as a ninja and my apprentice. Naruto's gaze grew hard, almost to point of intimidating, and then he nodded. Dismissed. Anko was left alone on the roof, watching as the orange blur sped away from her. Absently she wondered if she'd ever see Naruto again. And if so, how she would feel about it. An orange blur shot across the rooftops, searching everywhere while traveling in random directions. He only had 20 minutes left. He had to find this Kakashi, get that book and get back. Passing the ramen stand, he was sorely tempted to stop, and as several bowls he even went so far as to slow down. Then shaking his head he averted his gaze and sped away. He could not dawdle. He did promise, however, that after he stole the book and got it back to Anko, he would eat ramen and plot revenge against the gods for giving him such an insane teacher. First he would desecrate several shrines, just to show that he was not intimidated, and then he would. Wait, was that the man he was supposed to steal the book from? Skidding to a halt, uprooting several roofing tiles in the process, he came to a stop and turned to stare at the man. Yes, silver hair, masked face, little red naughty book. It was him, strolling down the semi-empty market street, as if he did not have a care in the world. Without thinking, Naruto leapt from the rooftop and landed in a crouch, cutting the man off, grinning confidently. Hey, hey! Naruto shouted at the masked Jonin, who continued walking towards him. I'm talking to you. Naruto shouted once more, not moving, preparing to attack. Yet to his surprise, Kakashi somehow managed to appear behind him without even looking up from his book. Naruto spun around, scowling. Hey, you bastard! Don't just ignore me. Goaded into attacking, Naruto drew and tossed several kunai quickly, only to has the man catch each one without looking up from his book. Ugh. Naruto took a step back, hand coming up in front of him. That was just crazy. Turning, Kakashi stared at him oddly, his tone bland. You're a little bit off, aren't you? Oi! You're the one that's off here. Naruto shouted, staring the man who slid the captured kunai into his pocket and continued to read his book. So what do you want? Kakashi asked, turning a page. Your book. Naruto answered flatly. Give it to me, or I'll have to beat you up and take it. For a moment, Naruto thought that he had managed to scare the man, but Kakashi just continued to read, turning a page every so often before he suddenly looked up as if realizing that Naruto was still there. Oh. Well then, I suppose you'll have to beat me up and take it. That said, Kakashi returned to reading, not paying attention to Naruto anymore. Why that? Lifting his hands, he started to perform his sexy jutsu but stopped, scowling. No, if he won using that, he could not claim to be a real ninja. This was one fight that he wanted to succeed at without resorting to a cheap trick. Nodding, he shouted something and charged, pulling an arm back as if to punch. He changed his mind halfway through the attack and instead jumped while spinning. Normally a kick of some sort would follow this move, but instead Naruto threw a hammer fist, counting on the element of surprise. The Unbu commander casually caught the fist, without even looking up from his book, stopping all the forward momentum. Naruto was undaunted, however, and shifted his remaining momentum to carry him through into a round kick, which Kakashi simply ducked, still not looking up from his book. Naruto felt his foot touch the ground a second before he pushed off again, a punch aimed at Kakashi's face. The Unbu commander, still in a crouching position, somehow managed to disappear and reappear behind a now frozen Naruto, who had his punch fully extended. A ninja isn't supposed to get caught from behind, idiot. Kakashi said conversationally as Naruto turned eyes wide. Seconds before Naruto could even consider what was about to happen, Kakashi was moving, thrusting his fingers forward. Hidden Leaf, Ancient Teivatsu, Supreme Attack, 1,000 Years of Pain. Seconds later, Naruto was yelling and launching himself high into the air from the jab to his ass. Kakashi sighed, standing upright. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. He had expected more from Naruto. Yet his Teivatsu had been subpar at best. The boy did not even seem to grasp the concept of stealth and what was with that jumpsuit. He was almost ashamed that Naruto had learned his sensei's technique. Shaking his head, Kakashi turned, opening his book once more. Oh well, it had proved slightly entertaining at least. Ignoring the looks he received for either the book or having just shattered a genin's dream, he wasn't sure. He continued on his way, giggling. Freya-sama knew how to tell a great story, that was for sure. Turning a corner, he stopped long enough to buy lunch without looking up from his book, and then continued on, wondering what else he could do on his lunch break. That was not supposed to happen. Naruto raised to himself as he quickly approached the rooftop of a building. He tried to twist so that he could brace for the impact, but this only made it worse, and his head smashed painfully against the rooftop with a loud cracking sound. It was the last thing Naruto saw before darkness engulfed him. Naruto felt like he was sinking and rising at the same time. Floating was the best word to describe it. Yes, he was floating in liquid darkness. Then he felt a burning sensation, spreading out from his stomach. The heat intensifying, and he gasped, feeling as if the darkness was rushing into his lungs. Who was that strange blonde-haired man smiling sadly at him? The burning engulfed every part of his body, and suddenly, he was awake and sitting up. Looking around, he panted heavily, his head feeling heavy and hurting. Reaching up, he touched his head and feeling something slick, pulled his hand away to reveal blood. He was bleeding. Beginning to panic, he ran his fingers through his hair, desperately searching for a wound of some kind but found nothing. He breathed easier at that now if he could just get rid of this damned headache. Climbing to his feet, Naruto turned, remembering that he had been fighting Kakashi, almost expecting the man to have followed him. Instead he saw an empty street. Damn it. How long had he been out? Where did Kakashi go? Shaking his head to clear a buzzing sensation, he started moving. Nothing else mattered except getting that damn perverted book. Still, even as he searched, he was not sure how he would manage it, especially after the humiliating way that Kakashi had beaten him earlier. Unfortunately, the blow to his head had not let him forget that. How could he? His ass was still hurting from that damn attack. Cursing out loud, he redoubled his speed, searching for Kakashi while applying his prankster mind to the problem of how to beat the masked man. Maybe if he had an army, he could beat that masked-ass poking bastard. Wait. Naruto did has an army of cave bushins. Now, how could he use them to beat the man up and steal that book? Skidding to a halt, he found a man, noticing that he was only a few blocks away from where Anko was waiting for him. He needed to hurry. Then inspiration struck him, prankster inspiration, the gods were with him today. Still, to pull it off he needed something. Maybe with luck. Yes. Rummaging through his pouch, he pulled out a small scroll. He only had a couple of these left. If only he had paid more attention during Iruka's classes, he would not have to waste it now, but there was no time to lament. Lifting his fingers, he molded his chakra, grinning wickedly as a dozen cave bushin clones appeared around him. Right. Everyone understand the plan. Right. His clones shouted back to him. The lazy-eyed ninja continued to meander down the empty street. He had noticed that a group of youths, suspiciously clothed in identical bright orange minus attire, were rapidly closing in on him. They seemed to be trying to hide their approach as they moved to surround him. Kakashi smiled. Maybe his earlier assessment of the boy had been too harsh. Surrounding an enemy with superior numbers, and then launching a surprise attack was a pretty good strategy. Basic, but a hell of a lot better than a genin trying to take on a Jonin in a direct fight. There might be some hope for the kid after all. Then again, he reflected as nearly a dozen Narutos jumped from hiding into battle stances around him. Maybe he was an idiot. Didn't last time teach you anything? Kakashi sighed. Apparently ignoring the comment, one of the Narutos yelled, "Who's the idiot now? Let's see you catch my kunai when they are coming at you from all directions." In response, Kakashi just stared at Naruto, his visible eyebrow raised slightly in surprise. Was the brat really that stupid? Had he never heard of crossfire? But he did not as long to ponder this, instead twisting to the side, gracefully dodging a kunai thrown by a Naruto behind him. A moment later he heard a satisfying pop as the kunai embedded itself into the clone that had been standing in front of him, dispelling it. Kakashi could not help but chuckle to himself. "Hey Barker. I thought you wanted to fight me, not yourself." At this he heard one of the Narutos growl in anger. That's probably the real one, clones always has weaker emotional reactions. Turning to that Naruto, Kakashi said lazily, "You know you shouldn't reveal yourself like that. It makes it too easy." "I know. Why don't you go home and try again tomorrow?" As he spoke he could see the anger building up in the boy. One more push should put him over the edge. Maybe you could get some help on strategy from someone. That Uchiha kid seems bright. I am sure that he could give you some pointers. Kakashi finished with a small laugh. "You bastard. You're gonna pay," screamed the enraged Naruto, hurtling his kunai at Kakashi, who was doing his best not to break out laughing. The brat was too easy to read, and his throw was horribly off. It would miss him by, at least 6 inches. Best of all, there was another of the boy's cave bushins right in the kunai's path. Naruto might not be much of a ninja, but at least he was good for laughs. Not bothering to move, he turned his attention back to his book, giggling at how amusing his lunch break was turning out to be. There was a pop and a puff of smoke, then suddenly the book was ripped out of his hand. Whirling around he saw the bushin, who he had expected to be impaled by the thrown kunai, deftly catch another Naruto, who had been hurtling through the air clutching his little red book just before. For a moment Kakashi stood there in shock. It hit him. It had all been a trick. The bushin circle, the mock anger, the kunai, Naruto, his book. His book. He was about to spring at the boy, when he was tackled from behind and buried under a pile of orange ninjas. Throwing them off an instant later and standing up, Kakashi received his second shock of the day. The small previously empty street was now filled with over 100 Narutos, all grinning devilishly at him. "Give it back to me," Kakashi seized, a wave of killing intent rolling off of him. "Oh," responded one of the Narutos nonchalantly. "Well then I suppose that you'll have to beat me up and take it." The veins on Kakashi's forehead bulged. "With pleasure," he said generously. Kakashi knew what his mistake had been. It was obvious. He had underestimated the blonde genin. That was the only way such a trick could work. Well, he would not underestimate Naruto again. Oh no, as a matter of fact, Kakashi was going to make sure the boy was stuck in the deepest and dankest cell, the Unbu hand. How dare the boy steal his precious? Narrowing his eyes, Kakashi gave chase. He dealt with the Naruto's clones only to find the original had not been among them and was instead fleeing the area. Noting that Naruto's speed had improved since their brief skirmish earlier and that the boy had a good head start, Kakashi drove himself to catch up. In the distance, Naruto dropped to the street, darting around a corner and then using a series of leaps from successive ledges and windowsills cleared a wall. Kakashi cleared the same wall in a single bound not 3 minutes later. Seeing Naruto struggling his way out of clothesline, tossing a pair of frilly underwear off his head and avoiding the barking dog, Kakashi increased his speed. If his book was damaged, then death would be a welcomed relief to the bastard child after he was through him. The boy in question glanced back at him only briefly before he bolted once more, knocking an older woman over as he tore out into the street. Moments later, Kakashi burst out onto the street, seeing Naruto slipping and sliding as he made a near impossible turn. Following, Kakashi passed through a pair of wildly swinging doors. Jumping over a bar of soap, Kakashi noted absently that he was in the women's bath full of young and middle-aged women who did not seem to be in the habit of bathing with towels. Kakashi was tempted to stop, but decided instead, spurred on by appearance of a bodyguard minus that he had other more important matters on his hands. Namely the murder of Uzumaki Naruto. Bursting through the still swinging back door, he skidded to a halt, looking around frantically for the boy. He was alerted seconds later to the blonde's location by the shout of "Tadukave Bunshine." Racing to the end of the alleyway, he found dozens of Naruto scattering in every direction, each carrying a little red book. Raising his own fingers, Kakashi glared. "Tadukave Bunshine, Kakashi version." Seconds later, each Naruto clone was being chased by an angry Kakashi clone. Taking a bite of her dango followed a sip of her juice, Anko smiled in satisfaction. Swinging her legs, she glanced at her watch, then closed her eyes, taking another bite. In a few minutes, some Unbu, lackey, or even Kakashi himself would show up and tell her the horrible news. Yup. Any minute now, Anko would no longer has a student. Oh. The tragedy. Nothing better than dango and juice. Anko said happily, finishing off her dango followed by checking her watch. Well, maybe screwing that old man out of torturing me. So, excited about her imminent return to her A-ranked missions, she started to hum a happy tune, until the orange blur came crashing back onto the roof in front of her. Naruto scrambled to his feet and shoved a little red book into Anko's hands just as the bell rang on her watch, announcing that he not only survived but also succeeded in his mission. Naruto did look decidedly worse for the wear. Almost as if he was on his last legs. Eyes narrowing, Anko glanced from the blonde to the book in her hands, noting the familiar markings of Kakashi. Damn it, she hadn't expected Naruto to actually pass. Anko thumbed the book for a moment, then looked back at Naruto. "How did you do it?" "I kicked his ass." Naruto bragged, stooping over to gasp for air. "You kicked the Unbu commander's ass?" Anko questioned, unable to keep amusement out of her voice. She would have to accept that since the boy had not only escaped Kakashi, but also completed the mission objective. Well, congratulations, I guess. Not many genin could beat an Unbu commander. "So do I pass?" Naruto suddenly said, jerking upright and looking as if he hadn't just fought one of the Leaf's strongest ninjas. Actually, as Anko studied his face, he looked more like he was about to start celebrating. She was starting to consider ways to murder him when the truth of what Naruto had done struck her. He had beaten Kakashi. Her student had managed to earn a win against one of the most powerful ninja in the village. Sunday might be right. Hell, at this point the brat could probably even handle a B-ranked mission. No, a bit of training first. But Anko tingled at the thought. "Well, I guess I'll make it official tomorrow or something," Anko said finally, struggling to keep from dancing. Welcome to Team Anko. Seeing the shock on his face, she grinned, then leapt to her feet, taking off at high speed. She needed to put a training regiment together. Sadly, she had never been a sensei before, so she was flying blind. Still, Naruto remained where he was at for several seconds and then started cheering, performing an odd dance as he celebrated becoming a full-fledged ninja. Yes, yes, yes. First he was going to find Iruka-sensei and celebrate with several bowls of ramen, and then he'd find Sakura-chan and she'd be so impressed with him that. "Where's my book?" A familiar voice questioned commandingly, and Naruto spun around quickly, staring up into the face of Kakashi, who had both eyes exposed as if ready for anything. What book?" The blonde stammered, blue eyes wide. "The one you stole from me." Kakashi growled threateningly, his red eyes swirling. I don't have it." Kakashi's eyes narrowed as he started cracking his knuckles and advancing on the trembling leaf genin. The ancient forest belonging to Konoha almost looked magical in the moonlight. The grass and trees glowed and the sky overhead sparkled with thousands of distant stars, each unique and bright. It was a beautiful night, filled with the soft sounds of crickets and other nocturnal inhabitants of the forest. One such inhabitant was a small fox that stalked something in the darkness, stopping now and then to sniff the air before finding the scent anew and running in a different direction. After a few minutes the fox slowed to a trot, so that he was still moving briskly but with even more stealth. He caught a scent behind him. It smelled rather canine, but he ignored it. The first scent was more intriguing and it was getting stronger. Suddenly slowing, he crept through the underbrush, emerging into a clearing with 3 large stumps, and a figure tied to the middle one. Cautiously the fox approached, sniffing as it went, moving in slow even steps toward the apparently unconscious blonde male. Stopping, it sniffed his foot, then it twitching took off back into the forest, as if frightened by whatever it had discovered. Amazingly, it had been so silent that one would have to be an unbu to detect it. With a low, pain-filled groan, Naruto opened his eyes. Staring blearily at the world around him, then pausing, realized that he could not move an inch. To make matters worse, his body was stiff and sore. Then his stomach decided to growl, and he realized that he was hungry too. Damn it. What happened to him and where was he? Struggling futilely against the ropes for several minutes, he stopped and hung his head. He shouldn't have skipped the review on how to escape this type of thing. Though putting hot sauce in the Hokage's tea had been a pretty good prank. Still, it didn't help him much now, which meant he had only one option left. "Hey! Someone untie me! Damn it!" Naruto shouted, listening as his voice echoed before he repeated it. Chapter 3 Training. Naruto stumbled along, mind muddled by a lack of sleep. He was lucky he could even put one foot in front of the other, and it was due mostly to the hand he had outstretched that he had found his way to the secluded training area that his new sensei had told him they were using. Stifling a yawn, he sleepily swore that if she was not there, he was going home and back to bed. He had had enough of that crazy woman at 3 that morning when she dragged him out of bed for a morning warm-up. Mumbling apologies, he managed to keep several angry women and one oddly grateful old woman minus from attacking him and his offending hand, so that he reached the selected training grounds relatively unharassed. Through bleary eyes he saw that he was utterly alone, and decided that instead of dragging himself all the way back home, he would collapse there and catch up on his sleep. Collapsing like a puppet that had its strings cut, he sprawled out near one of the posts. Sleep, however, eluded him for the most part, but he settled to dozing, allowing his mind to assault him with images of Sakura brining him bowls of free ramen, while his sensei Anko would extol how he was more talented than anybody, and how proud she was to be on the same team as the boy that could win against such strong opponents as Mizuki and Kakashi. Then he'd show her all his moves and wham! Ow, www. Naruto yelped, jerking at the sharp and painful contact with his ribs. Sitting upright, he turned his dark glare on the attacker who stood over him. Preparing to insult them, he found himself staring at the barely legal skirt that topped the legs of his sensei. Biting back his angry retort, he let his gaze drift even higher, over her immodest fishnet shirt, which conjured several odd daydreams in his head, minus to her smug face. Naruto could not help but blush faintly. "And what, may I ask, is going through your twisted little mind?" Anko inquired curiously, raising an eyebrow. Nothing, Anko-sensei." Naruto shouted involuntarily, hands going behind his head nervously. Like whenever Sakura caught him staring at her in that way. Usually he would be hit over the head painfully. "Right. Anko said, narrowing her eyes. Well, guess I better give you the rules now, ho. Right. Naruto said enthusiastically, nodding. While he was not a fan of rules, it could be said that he subscribed to the notion that they were made to be broken minus. He would listen to anything she wanted to say because she was going to help him become an even awesomer ninja. Reaching into her coat, she pulled out 3 kunai, holding them up between her fingers. First, Anko said, sending a kunai speeding toward the space between his legs and crotch. Get whatever perverted thoughts you has about my body out of your mind. Oi. Naruto started to protest, jumping to his feet only to duck as another kunai sailed over his head, taking several locks of his hair. Just how crazy was this woman? Second, do not call me censor. My name is Anko. I don't believe in being polite, and neither do you from what I can tell. So let's just save ourselves the trouble. Anko narrowed her eyes, studying him closely. Also, keep the noise down. Mornings aren't my thing, especially after a night at the bars, and you're giving me a headache. Oh. Yay. Naruto said, staring at the third-bladed weapon. So. Anko, what's the other rule? Twirling the weapon on her finger, she managed a very disturbing grin. We start with taijutsu sparring every day, but not until this kunai is embedded in a tree. That said, she took 2 leaps backwards and grasped the kunai with 3 fingers, flicking her wrist to send the weapon thudding into a nearby tree without looking. Naruto darted forward, missing the fact that his sensor was not moving an inch. She even seemed distracted, as if he wasn't that important. Narrowing his eyes, he redoubled his speed, intent on making her see that he was not somebody to take lightly. Much to his surprise, he found himself within striking distance without her moving. Training from the academy took over and he pushed off the ground, attempting to send a right cross into her cheek. What happened next caught him completely by surprise. Anko twisted her body, swatting his punch up and away like it was a pesky fly, then jabbed 2 fingers into his armpit, sending intense pain up the side of his body. Yet before Naruto could even process that, she drove her palm into his chin, knocking him to the ground with a spray of blood as his teeth cut into his tongue. Blinded by pain, Naruto completely forgot about Anko as he brought his hands up to his mouth where they grew slick with his blood. His mind was reeling, unable to process what had just happened. Hadn't they been sparring? Oh gods, the pain. Why had she done that? Gods, why wouldn't the pain stop? He spent several minutes on his back, clutching his mouth, and then finally, as the pain ebbed enough for him to function, he glared up at her through eyes blurred by tears. What he saw there confused him more than anything. Anko was standing there with a look of intense disapproval on her face. That the jack, that's dafty. Naruto shouted angrily, spitting blood from his mouth and still covering it with his hands. That was a palm heel. Anko answered blandly. I should be the one asking you what the hell you're doing sitting around. I didn't say we were done. That. Naruto exclaimed, jumping to his feet, spreading his arms wide and allowing the blood in his mouth to drip onto his chin. Are you insane? Fine. I guess you're not a ninja after all. Anko taunted, letting her loathing show in her words. Naruto felt himself bristle at that, something that which he was not quite familiar with. Not a ninja. Not a ninja. Suddenly forgetting his linger pains, he attacked her once more, moving like a wild animal. His punches were more liking, clawing than anything they had learned in the academy. His mind seemed obsessed with hitting her, with whipping that smirk off her face. Yet each time she deflected his attacks. Are you trying to hit me? Anko asked casually, almost appearing to stifle a yawn. Then catching him by surprise once more, Anko struck. This time she caught one of his punches and moved to the side, her other hand slamming into the back of his neck, which was followed by suddenly driving him forward, in a spin before inverting the momentum, so that he twisted onto his back in the air. Naruto started to shout, but was cut off as the last of his breath was forced out of his lungs, as he landed on his back with a thud. Knowing enough not to just lie there, Naruto turned onto his stomach and raised himself to all fours, trying to get back to a vertical base, only to feel a hand slide under his chin and grab the opposite collar of his jacket. This was followed by a leg, hooking one of his arms while his other was knocked from under him. A moment later he found himself wrenched over by the combined action of the wrist against his neck, and the leg entangling his arm. Unable to support himself, he was forced onto his back again, this time with his arms were spread out as if affixed to a crucifix, one tightly wrapped in Anko's legs, the other firmly held by one of her own arms. An astute observer would note that the position was a textbook form of the Vigokufime, the Hell Strangle, minus a technique named for its reputation of giving those who experienced it a glimpse into torments of the damned. At that point though, Naruto was neither astute nor observing. He was suffering greatly. Anko had chosen to forego the quick and painless artery choke normally used in this technique, for a larynx-crushing variation. This had the pleasure of increasing both the intensity of the pain and allowing the victim to remain conscious to experience it. Added to this punishment, Anko had managed to maneuver her legs so that she was able to apply pressure on his entrapped arm, forcing it to bend unnaturally. Naruto could not think of anything but to thrash around in a hopeless attempt to escape. He could not even scream out at the pain since no air could move into or out of his lungs. Then suddenly the pain was gone and he was forcibly kicked away. He rolled in a cloud of fallen leaves before coming to a stop on his side, clutching his arm and biting back his curses. He coughed to reopen his airway. Never attack an enemy blindly. Anko shouted angrily. Now this time when you attack me, don't go wild. Use your damn head, watch my movements and stay relaxed. Otherwise next time I will break your arm. Naruto glared up at her, unmoving, his mind filled with violent thoughts that he had never really had before. Thankfully his common sense was prevailing and he was not trying to act on any of those satisfying though admittedly stupid minus ideas. Instead he was thinking about how he could just get up and leave, how he could complain to Iruka and the Hokage about her and thus be free from her torture. Yet, he had never backed down from anyone or anything before, and he was not sure what he would do if they announced that without Anko he would be forced to abandon being a ninja and accept life as a normal citizen of the village. Besides, there was a burning in his blood, a desire to keep fighting and that would not allow him to just give up. Climbing back to his feet, still clutching his arm, he hacked and spit a glob of blood at her foot, shooting her one of the most hateful glares that he had. Maybe there's hope for you after all. Anko allowed, her sadistic smile in place once more. Screw you, you sadistic bitch. Naruto shouted, charging forward, letting his arm go and rearing back for a punch. A minute later a loud cracking sound was followed by a scream of pain. Iruka was feeling hopeful, even excited. He had a spring in his step and smile on his face. At last he was king of his classroom. There was no Naruto to muck things up. As much as Iruka liked the boy, there was no denying Naruto mucked almost everything up for the class. Not today however. Oh no, today he had a class full of attentive and well-behaved recruits. He even had the Hokage's grandson, though he hadn't seemed especially interested in anything Iruka had to say. Still, today was a good day. Nothing could possibly ruin it to him. Not even knowing that Naruto's sensei was probably at this moment skinning the boy alive. Iruka stumbled in mid-step at that thought, then scowled. No, he was definitely upset over that thought, because having known Anko since they were both genin, he knew exactly how vicious he could be if motivated. Naruto could motivate anybody. Anko was a fan of pain. Iruka decided that after he had some ramen he would go has a few shots of sake to avoid thinking on the horrible fate that was befalling his adopted brother. Nodding, he started off once more, hurrying as he went, almost knowing that there would be nothing left due to the lunch rush, or more correctly the Naruto rush. Minus reaching the familiar Ichiraki stand, he pushed aside the flaps and stepped into the mildly dim ramen stand. He noted with a bright smile that Ayame seemed to be working alone today. The pretty waitress spotted him as well and with a blush waved. Iruka-kun. Iruka started toward the stool directly in front of the girl, watching as she put the rag down and leaned forward against the back of the counter. So, busy day at the academy? For once, no. Not at all. Iruka beamed, taking his seat. Speaking of busy days, Iruka-chan, are you working by yourself today? The girl blushed faintly, casting a glance at the sole other customer in the bar before looking back at him. Yay, I decided he'd like to go fishing today. Leaning forward slightly, she rested her chin in her hand, locking eyes with him. I'm closing the bar at 7, Iruka-kun. Iruka grinned, scratching the back of his head nervously. Even he could not miss the hint she had just given him, yet she was fishing for a date. Sadly, Iruka just did not have enough confidence to believe that she would actually want to date him more than once. Aha. Do you still has any ramen? I know it's a bit of a risk coming in following the lunch rush. Pouting, Ayame stood up and cocked a hip hand resting against the counter. We has plenty. Naruto never showed up today. That's strange. Iruka said, scratching the side of his nose. Well, I suppose his sensei kept him training. You mean he actually passed? Ayame said, eyes wide. I thought he was just, I dunno, trying to get a free bowl of ramen or something. Oh no, he did. Oka scowled slightly. Not that I'm exactly happy about who the Hokage choose to teach him. Oh. Ayame frowned. Yeah, she's not exactly the teaching sort. Oka trailed off, however, seeing the shock on Ayame's face and the way her eyes had widened. Turning, Oka expected to see among things Kakashi without his mask, or enemy shinobi pillaging the village, or the horrible sight of Ayame's father drunk and naked. Instead, he found himself staring at a disgruntled, bloodied, blonde genin known as Uzumaki Naruto. Oka watched in total silence as the blonde shuffle walked forward, looking almost as if he was unsure of where he was. Naruto did not even seem to register that Oka was there. He merely moved toward the counter and weakly climbed onto the stool beside Oka, promptly allowing his head to flop forward. Oka sat there in stunned silence. It did not look as if Naruto had been stabbed, but all that blood and the zombie-like manner with which he was moving. Yes, it was safe to say that Oka was very worried. Naruto. Ayame whispered, reaching out to touch the blonde's head before hesitating and moving away slightly. Ugh. Naruto groaned in response. Oka glanced at a worried Ayame, then back at Naruto, wondering what exactly Anko could have done to the boy to put him in this state. Are you okay? Ugh. Oka hesitated, fighting the urge to alternatively grab the boy and go to the hospital and hunting Anko down for an attempted murder. Instead, he settled for asking in his mind a very stupid question. What has you been doing? The blonde lifted his head at this, glaring. I've been training for 10 hours. Naruto's voice started to rise. With a sadistic, insane, psychotic bitch. Naruto, calm down. Oka said, looking around almost embarrassedly. I'm sure she's just minus. That psychotic bitch is trying to kill me. Naruto shouted before slamming his hand on the counter. Well, I hate to tell her this, but I am not going to die until I'm Hokage. Okay, Naruto. Take a breath. Anko-san is just trying to be a good teach minus. That sadistic bitch isn't trying to teach me. Naruto roared, earning a reproachful look from Ayame. Oh. Oka said, gulping nervously. Only Naruto could have the sort of luck that would allow the woman in question to be directly behind him. Naruto. Sadistic bitch ho. Anko said, her tone conversational. Naruto reacted without hesitation, spinning around to glare at her, apparently not intimidated at all. Yay. You're trying to kill me. Naruto shouted angrily. I've been stabbed, beaten and had my arm broken, healed, rebroken, rehealed. Oka felt the blood rushing from his face, staring at the two. He could not remember anyone ever calling Anko that. To her face at least. It just was not a safe practice, and as much as Oka liked Naruto, he wisely used all of his skill to move 3 stools away in case Anko decided to rend Naruto limb from limb. A small frown line appeared on Anko's face as her eyes narrowed. You haven't seen nothing yet, you little prick. Reaching out, she grabbed the boy by the back of the neck and thurked him off the stool and started frog marching him despite his attempts at fighting back minus out of the stand. Oka stared after them, unable to believe what he had seen. He was going to need several shots of sake tonight. Then tomorrow, yay. Tomorrow, he would have to report to the Hokage about what he had seen. Leaving Naruto at the hands of Anko was just irresponsible. Our ramen? Ayame asked hesitantly, her own eyes locked on the entrance as well. Oka nodded faintly, still not looking away from the entrance. Miso. Pick me up at 7:30. Okay. Shoving Naruto forward so that he stumbled and fell face first onto the ground, Anko crossed her arms and glared at him. So he thought she was sadistic. Thought she was trying to kill him. He had no idea what those terms meant. First thing was first, she would enlighten this annoying brat about calling her names. When he had gotten back to his feet and turned to shout at her, Anko threw a kunai from her forearm holster at him, nicking his cheek. Before he could properly register what had happened, she was behind him, leaning over his shoulder. With her voice a low whisper, she spoke into his ear. I don't care what you call me. A shinobi doesn't care if they're called a genius or a fool, the main thing is winning. I don't care if you hate me. When he remained silent, she grinned and licked a cut on his cheek. His blood didn't taste that bad. All I care about, Naruto, is that you learn what I have to teach you. Using her free hand, she offered up a kunai, her cheek pressing against his. Now then, I want you to take this kunai and pick a training post. Naruto took the kunai and properly cowed for the moment minus wandered to the training post in the middle of the clearing. Smiling Anko produced her own and picked the first post, staring at him levelly. You need to watch closely, what I am about to try and teach you is very difficult to learn. Without even looking at the post, or moving her body she struck, driving her kunai as far into the post as humanly possible. Seeing the surprise on Naruto's face she allowed a faint smirk to grace her features. In the heavy style this is considered a basic move, but very few can actually manage it. The key is to keep your shoulders absolutely still, to not let your eyes stray to where you're striking and to move with the unpredictable suddenness of a cobra. Right. Naruto mumbled, before he attempted the move. On his first attempt he drove the kunai 3/4 of the way into the post, but his shoulders had moved and his eyes had drifted to his target. Try it again. Anko said patiently. Taijutsu had to be learned harshly but weapons and chakra control needed to be taught with patience. She could not show it to him, and then just expect him to understand it perfectly. He was not a thieving Uchiha after all. Naruto, muttering curses, did as ordered. Keep your shoulders still. Anko noted. First form and then she could concentrate on his eyes. She watched critically as he struggled to grasp the concept and keep his body from moving. Anko actually lost count of how many times he stabbed the post, how many times she told him to keep his shoulders still, but finally, he got it down halfway decently. Good. Now, keep your eyes focused on me when you do it. Anko said calmly, twirling her kunai on a finger. While she noted with displeasure the way his eyes would twitch toward the post, just before he struck, Anko also noted how his arm varred from the force of each blow. At least he was doing it with everything he had still. His form was sloppy as hell. Well, it would still be added in Anko's mental "I'm not going to kill Naruto because" list. So far this list contained the fact that he seemed to recover from everything she did to him quickly, his atypically large chakra capacity and his willingness to put everything into what he was doing. Oi! Why am I doing this? Naruto suddenly asked, glaring at her. Anko had to bite back her annoyance. An enemy can't read your movements if you don't telegraph your intentions. That's the basic principle behind the heavy style. Everything we do in this style is to deny our enemies the ability to predict what we're about to do. Oh. Naruto said, scowling through a moment. How'd you come up with it? I didn't, Anko said, narrowing her eyes. My sensei developed this style back when he was a genin to negate the reading abilities of the Uchiha and Hyuga. Oh. Naruto scowled in thought for a moment. So, if I get this down I can kick Sasuke's ass. Anko raised an eyebrow. Rivalry seemed to really motivate the kid. Not if you talk instead of practice. Nodding, Naruto resumed his training, striking even harder than before. Anko watched for a moment, frowning faintly. Keep working on this. In an hour or so I'll show you the next step for this move. When he did not even act like he was listening she smirked, jumping to the top of her post where she produced a carton of dango. Studying him more intently than ever, Anko could almost feel impressed with the amount of effort he was putting into his training. This was offset by the fact that he was one of the single most annoying people she had ever met. Continuing to frown, Anko finished at least 2 more sticks of dango, watching as he finally seemed to get the basic concept down, though his form was still sloppy as hell. Yeah, his shoulders were not moving, but there was still a slight shift in his weight every time he drove the kunai into the post. Still, it was a vast improvement compared to where he had started from. Stretching, she took a step off the post, landing lightly beside it with her hands in her pockets. Stop. He struck once more, then turned to look at her. The next step is a tad harder, so I'll have to move slow. Pay extra attention, alright? Fine. Anko smiled faintly, selecting her kunai and took a step forward while ducking to the right. This was followed by her arm sweeping back to drive the kunai deep into the post at an angle. Turning, she smiled at the boy. The first step I showed you was so that you could learn not to telegraph your moves. This move is slightly different. You're taking a step forward and moving to the right, all without telegraphing it. But what good will that do? Jail, just jump out of the way. Naruto protested. Anko smirked, almost hearing an echo of herself in that question. Pulling her kunai from the training post, Anko motioned for him to attack. Naruto hesitated for a half second and then lunged forward, completely wild. Anko struck perfectly using the ring on the end of the kunai to hit his throat. The result was he fell on his ass, choking slightly. Grinning Anko could not help but narrow her eyes. That's the secret, runt. Even if you came at me another way it'd be the same result, because to attack is to run into your opponent. Shifting to the side lets you strike in a way that they can't read or expect. What? Naruto asked blankly. Do this without telegraphing your moves and you'll be one step above everyone from your year. Anko grinned before gesturing toward his post. Try it. Remember to stay close, pretend you're dodging a jab. You push off at an angle with your lead foot at the same time you strike. Anko moved back a half step, watching as he coughed and got back to his feet to do as she ordered. Amazingly, he seemed to have the concept down better than the first move he practiced, but he still left a full foot between him and the post. Closer. Naruto spared her a glare and then tried it again, this time so fast and hard that he buried his kunai in the post. Turning, he glared at Anko, who smiled faintly. Now do that 100 more times. Both sides. And the kami's sake. Try to stop telegraphing your moves. Each step was taken with a sharp pain, born mostly from exhausted muscles and aching joints. The head was bent forward, the neck unable to fully support its weight. It could, by all accounts, have been considered a good thing to be going home after nearly a full day of unending torture. This was not taking into account that it was 11 at night and raining. So he was drenched, filled with pain, and walking through the only slum in Konoha. A slum that was noted for the high death rate for children and oblivious ninja. Yet Naruto went unaccosted. Why? He didn't care. He would worry about that tomorrow after he had slept for 8 to 12 hours. Stumbling up the stairs of the practically condemned building that his apartment resided in, ignoring his calves and lower back that insisted on reminding him of what they had been through that day, minus he felt his eyes going in and out of focus. Was it really only a few hours ago that he had been so loud and worried about why Anko was trying to kill him? Now here he was swaying as he walked toward the battered door leading to his apartment, not caring one whit about the damn psychotic bitch. All he wanted was to collapse on his soft, comfortable bed and sleep. Sleep until he regained his will to eat ramen. Kami. That was blasphemy. Surely the gods of all that was right, pure, good and just in this world would see his plight and help him. Naruto dreaded thinking about what it would be like to not have an appetite for his precious ramen. What if he never wanted ramen again? It did not bore thinking about. Leaning against the door, consciousness threatening to leave him at any moment, even as he shivered from the wet clothing clinging to his skin while he searched wearily for his keys. It took him a good 20 minutes to realize that he had placed them in his inside pocket and another 5 to remember which one belonged to his door. Grumbling, Naruto fumbled with the lock for several moments before he finally opened the door and stepped into his cold and empty apartment. In an automated motion he closed the door, locked it, and proceeded to his bed without even turning on the light. So what if he was alone and had no one to fuss over his state? He had grown up used to it. Maybe Iruka would care, but he was not there now. So Naruto did not notice nor care. All he was interested in was falling blissfully into the arms of sleep. The second his knees hit the edge of the bed, he collapsed forward, face buried in the pillow, not caring that blood and rainwater was soaking from his clothes and hair into his sheets. He was asleep in an instant, tossing and turning minutes later, mumbling as his body started the long search for a position that allowed him a comfortable night's sleep. He tossed and turned, kicking blankets and stained pillows off the bed to sleep at an angle. Yet his body never found the proper position, and when the blaring of his alarm clock tore Naruto from his slumber, it felt as if the previous day had never ended. Every part of him demanded that he take the damned clock and smash it to dust. Still, his need for brutal destruction was put off by that fact that he was not alone. Much the way that prey can sense the presence of a predator, Naruto grew aware of a deadly presence in his room. A presence that had not been there when he had went to sleep. Specifically, he felt cold death in the aura of his sensei who stood in the doorway of his room. The unfairness of it all welled up, and Naruto reacted by seizing the nearest item and hurtling it at her. His alarm clock had this unfortunate fate, minus as he sat up. He was caught completely by surprise when the clock smashed into the wall in the hallway as his sensei moved beside his bed, slamming the palm of her hand against his forehead. Naruto fell back, banging his head against the bed's headboard as Anko narrowed her eyes, glaring at him. "I'll give you credit for being adaptive," Anko ground out, her bloodshot eyes glaring at him. But you're still slow as hell and has no damn sense. Bitch. Naruto muttered under his breath, rubbing the back of his head, his muscles groaning. Whatever, runt. Hurry up and get your ass out of bed, we've got a long day of training. I just went to bed. Naruto protested, only to flinch when Anko glared at him dangerously. Fine. Satisfied, Anko turned, walking back toward the door, only to stop and look back at him, her face scrunched up in disgust. And take a shower. Now. And from now on, before you go to bed. For Kami's sake. A ninja cannot expect to hide from someone if they can smell you from half a mile away. But if you don't, I will personally hold you under the water, and then shave every last hair off you. Anko narrowed her eyes. Every last one. Naruto stared at her for a moment, then, realizing that she was including the areas that Iruka had explained on his last birthday, blushed and choked in horror. 2 weeks of utter quiet, it was hard to believe. The village had become so peaceful since Anko had begun training Naruto. It seemed she only gave the boy time to eat, sleep, and train. Troublemaking had become a luxury that he neither had time nor energy for any longer. This was a good thing. Wasn't it? The Sandame sighed as he leaned back, then stood, stretching as he walked over to his tobacco cabinet. To anyone watching him at that moment, it would appear as if he was completely focused on preparing himself a pipe, but in truth his mind was far away. Gently tapping the pipe twice to settle the tobacco, he struck a match and then with practiced precision held the small flame against the dried leaves, drawing a slow breath. Too fast would snuff out the young flames, too slow and the fragrant tinder would not light. Smiling as the tobacco began to smolder, he reflected on how well this paralleled the situation that weighed upon his mind. Taking a long draw on his pipe, he walked to the large window in his office, which overlooked the Leaf Village. 2 weeks ago he had been confident that apprenticing Naruto to Anko was in the best interests of both of them. Yet this had proven false. Iruka's concerns had become his own as he observed their training sessions through his viewing sphere. It should have been the best for both of them. Naruto and Anko had walls that existed between them and the other members of the village. Naruto had no family or clan, the sole survivor of a terrible attack on the hospital, viewed with a loathing mostly because of a tendency to pull the most ingenious, infuriating and disrespectful pranks ever seen. Anko without family, tainted by an evil that was not her own making. Being younger than nearly everyone, being better than every other genin other than Kakashi. Isolated and forced into the ultimate killing tool for Orochimaru. A tool that, when its usefulness had been exhausted, was cast aside with a callousness lacking any trace of humanity. They should have been the perfect medicine for each other, should have helped each other. And yes, the boy's skills had improved greatly under her tutorage, but it was also clear to the Sandame that his humanity was suffering. Turning to his chair, he sat down, puffing tiny clouds from his pipe. Orochimaru had trained Anko to kill her humanity and replace it with an ability to serve him effectively without questions. Now, from what he could tell, Anko was using the same training on Naruto. Sandame shook his head again, a feeling of weariness settling on his shoulders. Why did he have to do this? Why wasn't the Yondem still alive? This was supposed to be his job. Sandame was a tired old man, he felt almost as if he was ready to crumble under the pressure. Groaning, the Sandame leaned back in his chair and located his cup of green tea while turning his mind to the security reports splayed out over his desk. Sipping at the bitter drink, he allowed his eyes to scan over a report from the UNBU team in Wind Country. It outlined in no uncertain terms the dangerous nature of one of the Sand Village's expected Chunin hopefuls, Gaara of the Desert. Normally the boy would not be a problem, a few UNBU teens slipped into the Chunin exam to keep an eye on him. Yet this would prove impractical due to whispers from Rain about the possibility of renewed hostility from the Stone Village. Adequate monitoring of this situation would require a substantial portion of his UNBU forces. Still, Sandame could not ignore Gaara. Kazekage's son or not, a loose cannon demon vessel was not a good thing to, as within one's hidden village. Due to the dignitaries who would be in attendance, he had no choice but to put a few teams of UNBU into the crowd during the final exam. If he could avoid that to the earlier exams though, that would be placing a lot of faith in the abilities of the Leaf Ninja, who would be administering and monitoring these exams. Most of them would be from the Chunin ranks, so he would have to make sure they had experienced leadership who would be capable of dealing with anything unexpected that might arise. Who could he select? Kakashi, of course, would be needed to organize and lead the response to the stone threat. However, it should be possible to arrange his presence during the final exam. He could also probably arrange to as Ibukai to the first exam. But then who could he assign to the second? Anko had done it in the past, quite successfully. Well, if Anko was free of other duties, she would be perfect for the second exam. The third exam would not need a high-ranked Jonin to lead it. It would has Unbu and at least a cave present, as well as his own presence. Thinking of the Chunin exam, how was Naruto going to participate? Sandaime frowned and tabled those thoughts for the moment and set his tea to the side. He had so much to deal with, it would not be so bad if he was just a few years younger. Kami, please give me the strength and keep it peaceful for just a little while longer. Sandaime muttered in prayer, closing his eyes. Alright, I want you to come at me with everything you have. Anko said, standing in the clearing while stretching. I mean everything, taijutsu weapons, ninjutsu. Everything, including an intent to kill. Seeing Naruto's blank stare, she narrowed her eyes. Or are you a coward like that, Uchiha? Seeing the way Naruto reacted, Anko smiled and quickly jumped into the trees, avoiding the first rain of weapons. Somehow she had thought comparing him to that Uchiha would make him angry enough to attack. Chuckling, she slipped her kunai from the forearm holster and waited for the blonde. Seconds later he was charged toward her, putting the tree climbing training from earlier to good use. The sound of metal clashing filled the air, followed shortly by an orange and yellow blur leaping back to land on the balls of his feet. Across from him in a casual stance stood Anko, studying his posture and the way he breathed. After a few minutes she narrowed her eyes. While she was more than pleased with his stamina, his posture and movements were still disappointing. They had only exchanged a few brief kunai blows, and he had still gotten his ass kicked, but he was not doing as nearly as horrible as he had 2 weeks ago. It was obvious to her why Naruto revealed himself in each of his movements and in the way he handled his weapons in combat. He was starting to use a rough and bastardized versions of her taijutsu style. He was mimicking her. Anko did not know whether to be pleased or not. After all, her moves came directly from one of the most feared ninja in the world, and it was nice to see them continue. Of course they were being bastardized in such a way that it was almost an insult. He moved without any of her fluidity, and he wasn't handling his kunai correctly. You flick your wrist. Anko said suddenly, then seeing she had his attention demonstrated by flicking her wrist to send a kunai into the branch he was standing on. When you throw a kunai, hold it with your thumb and first 2 fingers, then flick your wrist. Like a snake striking. Quick and sudden. Oh. Okay. Naruto said, looking at her cautiously. If you're going to bastardize my style of fighting, at least get that right. Anko grinned and produced another kunai from the inside of her jacket sleeve. Now shall we continue? Or should I go see if Sasuke wants to train? Anko cackled to herself, seeing the way his eyes narrowed at that jab. Her humor faded when he suddenly threw his kunai at her. This time as she had just shown him. Dodging to the right, she moved quickly, pushing off the branch to go higher. Damn, he was a fast learner when pissed. Naruto was hot on her heels, struggling to follow her lead. Anko grinned, suddenly twisting around and darting back down toward him, left, then right, then another left. She caught him by surprise and could see the shock on his face as she slipped through his defense and slammed a fist into his stomach. Naruto plummeted, the air escaping him along with his kunai. Without missing a beat, Anko retrieved the bladed weapon and landed daintily on a branch and watched as he continued to plummet until he managed to slap a hand against a tree branch and jerk himself to a stop with the application of chakra. Good. He had managed to figure out how to use the tree climbing exercise for something other than climbing. Anko considered him and the promise. There was no doubt that he had promise. But he was so haphazard when he regularly got his ass kicked by her, even when she was not really trying, and from what she had heard, Naruto was far below everyone else in his class in overall ability in terms of skill and knowledge. Should she give him a few pointers about her style? If so, then why not hand him a jutsu or 2? Nothing too dangerous and definitely nothing her sensei had taught her, but he needed something. Maybe the Kanashibari no jutsu. Anko muttered to herself, watching as Naruto pulled himself all the way onto the branch, breathing heavily. Is that all you got? I thought a future Hokage would has more. Naruto growled at that and pushed his way upright, glaring at her before he created several cave bunshines. Get her. Anko could not help but smirk, flipping backwards before plummeting straight to the ground. Seconds before the clones rebounded and charged, Anko produced a shuriken, launching her attack. Shuriken Cave Bunshin no Jutsu. Seconds later, the Naruto clones were caught in a barrage of clone shuriken. Seeing Naruto alone and breathing even heavier, Anko smirked. You know, if you're gonna keep using that technique, you need to add some variety to it. Bitch. Naruto shouted, launching himself downward. Anko moved quickly, leaving behind an exploding note that went off seconds before he landed. Grinning, Anko landed to watch as the smoke cleared to reveal Naruto, who was sprawled against a tree. His face was scratched from the hail of rock and dirt. Anko even felt smug about timing that so perfectly. You'll have to do better than that. Anko taunted, shaking her head. Naruto sat up, coughing, then looked up, eyes narrowed. You mean like this? Naruto retorted, throwing a kunai, which was soon joined by 10 clones suddenly charging from every direction, launching kunai of their own. Anko cursed, dodging back and working her way through the rain of deadly metal. Left, right, backflip, kawerimi with a Naruto clone, double jump, another kawerimi, and she was clear. Not bad. Obviously he was attempting to create a version of the technique that she had used earlier. Still, she was slightly disappointed that he had not been able to push her harder. Crouching on ground, she focused on the boy and his clones spread out in the branches and on the ground 20 or so yards away from her. Anko frowned a little while watching as the Naruto she took to be the original panted, leaning against the tree. She had almost decided to finish him when she sensed a new mass clones descending from overhead. Looking up, she saw 10 more clones hopping down through the branches above, each holding a kunai of their own and ready to strike. Anko grinned, happy to see that Naruto was not out of the fight yet, and prepared to move when a pair of legs and arms wrapped around her from behind once more. Surprise filling her face, she ran her eyes over the groups of clones above and in front of her. Weapons drawn, they were clearly preparing a mass kunai barrage. Okay, now he was starting to impress her. Timing it carefully, she preformed kawerimi yet again, putting the Naruto holding her in front just as all the weapons from ahead and above rained through her previous position. As chaos reigned, Anko darted into the trees once more, cursing at how sloppy she had been to get caught like that. She had relaxed her guard and he had taken advantage of that. Part of her wanted to be proud, the other part wanted to slit his throat. Anko was so lost in her thoughts she almost missed a clone descending from overhead with a kunai in hand. The key word was almost. Anko quickly altered her movement, darting inside the clone's guard for a strike, only to find an explosive note on his chest. Crap. Grabbing the clone's arm, she used the follow-through as momentum to clear the explosion field. Landing on a branch, she narrowed her eyes. Was it her, or was he getting better at using those damn things? Glancing down at the real Naruto, she noted that he was gathering his clones together, preparing for a new attack. Better luck next time, Anko said happily, watching as his army growled and prepared a coordinated attack. That would be dangerous. If she counted correctly, he had close to 25 clones now. He could easily overwhelm her with sheer numbers and his spontaneous plans for how to use those clones. Hell, he'd gotten her so distracted with the massive attacks that it had been all she could do to notice the attack coming from that clone bomb and avoid it. What truly boggled her mind was the sheer amount of chakra required to pull off all of those clones and to continue fighting. The good news, however, was that he definitely qualified to the Kanashibari, and the second he and his clones minus started the move, Anko molded the chakra. Thankfully it didn't require words or seals, it relied on control and mentally concentrating the chakra into spears. Seconds later she was hurtling said spears into Naruto's body, aiming for every pressure point and muscle group that she knew of. This would have the desired effect of not only freezing his body and making it impossible to move, but cause him a tremendous amount of pain. It also disrupted his chakra, thus as one his entire army of clones disappeared in a massive puff of smoke. Anko grinned seeing him lay on his back, face registering the shock and pain of having the Kanashibari slammed into his system. And that punk is how you beat a wannabe Hokage. Anko called down humorously while Naruto seemed to take offense at that and his muscles trembled from his attempts at movement. Chuckling, Anko dusted her hands off, dropping to the ground before wandering toward him lazily. Now, don't strain too hard, okay? You might pull something. Seeing his continued efforts, she could not help but laugh. He was stubborn, hell he was probably as stubborn as she was. Okay Barker, listen up. This is called the Kanashibari no Jutsu, sometimes called the paralyzing technique. You won't break free for 5 minutes. Seeing the way he stopped struggling, she patted his cheek almost affectionately. Smart boy. Now then. I want you to listen carefully cause I'm only going to explain how it works once. To use this technique you'll have to learn how to mold, then project chakra outwards and hit your target. Think of creating kunai out of chakra and aiming for the pressure points and muscles groups. Standing she smoothed out of her jacket before blowing him a kiss teasingly. Okay sweetie, you have fun out here. I need to get some breakfast. That said, Anko turned, whistling happily as she strolled leisurely back toward the training gates that led into the village marketplace. She would save the fact that if it was held any longer than 5 minutes he would die through a later day. Naruto was tired. This was a very unusual situation, mainly because Naruto never got tired. In the entire history of Konoha the blonde had never been tired. Yet here he was sprawled out on the ground in his blood-splattered jumpsuit, chin on his chest snoring something horrible. This prompted more than one person passing by the training grounds to wonder if a psychotic squirrel was loose in the woods. The truth was Naruto had decided that he was more than entitled to a quick nap. So instead of using the private training time as Anko had intended he had fled the area and found a secluded training place for his nap. It was even, by Naruto standards, a good nap. Ramen and Sakura were involved so how could it not be? That is until someone's foot came into sharp contact with his side. This met with a loud curse from the blonde who stared up at the asshole who had just kicked him awake, not bothering to hide just how pissed he was at being disturbed from his nap. It took him a moment to realize that the figure that had kicked him awake was dressed in a grey fur-lined jacket and had a white puppy perched on his head. This did not induce him into a polite frame of mind. Kiba. What the hell do you want? Much to Naruto's continued displeasure it was Sasuke that answered him. For you to leave. Jumping to his feet Naruto glared at the raven-haired boy who was leaning against a tree, with a pink-haired girl hovering nearby. Oi! Don't you tell me what to do. Sasuke muttered closing his eyes. Naruto glared at the boy, then snorted crossing his arms before noticing Sakura. How could he have missed that lovely shade of pink minor standing nearby? Sakura-chan. Naruto said excitedly moving toward her. Hey, would you like to go get some ramen? Sure. Sakura said brightly and Naruto thought he was going to die from surprise. Really? No. Naruto hung his head. He should not have been surprised. One day Naruto would prove to her that Sasuke was nothing. That he, as Uzumaki Naruto Hokage to be, was so much better that there was no comparing them. That Sakura belonged with him and not a flashy pretty boy. Hey, Naruto, why are they still letting you wear that? Kiba suddenly asked and the blonde blinked turning to look at his friend. Kiba, seeing the confusion on Naruto's face gestured at the forehead protector. Isn't it a crime to wear one when you're just some villager? Oi! Naruto grew indignant at that, reaching up to adjust his most prized possession. I passed. I've got a sensei and everything. Well, she's a psychotic bitch. Cha, they didn't even put you on a team, liar. Sakura interjected, scowling at him. You should just take it off. Bah. I'm a ninja and I'll wear it however long I want. Naruto retorted, glaring at them both before curiosity set in. So, why are you guys here? Our sensei told us to be here. Kiba said, grinning. Normally I wouldn't listen to anything a teacher had to say, but Kurenai sensei is really good. And she's hot too. She's got these long legs and... oh gods. Look, you can tell she's all woman. Kiba. Sakura said threateningly and Naruto snickered before glancing at an annoyed-looking Sasuke. Naruto scowled, thinking that it would not be long before he could beat that bastard's ass. Sasuke could be as cool as he wanted, but Naruto would kick his ass soon enough and then Sakura would notice him and that old ape of a Hokage would bow before him and... Naruto did not realize he was giggling minus until Sasuke glared at him and his tone harsh, inquired what's so funny loser. Naruto could have been smart as his common sense screamed minus, but instead he gloated the truth, as he saw it, completely missing the groan from Kiba and the shouts of indignation from Sakura. Me kicking your ass. You're right, that is funny. You couldn't beat me if you tried. You couldn't even put a finger on me. Naruto's face shifted from amusement to outright anger. I can too. You dim-witted idiot. I'm an Uchiha and while you're just a dead last loser. Sasuke retorted coolly. That doesn't mean anything. You're just a bunch of hot air, you pretty boy prick. Naruto retorted angrily. Why you? Sakura shouted, starting forward angrily with her knuckles cracking. Her progress was denied however, when Kiba managed to grab her around the waist and restrain her, which was no small feat minus. What do I care? Sasuke starting to turn away, only to freeze mid-turn at Naruto's next shout. Coward. Naruto roared. When Sasuke turned back to him, Naruto continued, I'm right, aren't I? All that big talk about how great you are and how much of a loser I am and everything. You're just a damn coward. Shut up. Make me. Naruto was not sure who took the first step, but suddenly they were barreling at each other, arms pulling back to their first punches. Naruto was not even sure why he had picked the fight, except maybe he wanted to impress Sakura. Yet it was anything but impressive when they clashed and Sasuke drove his fist into Naruto's mouth. Naruto reeled from the impact and for one brief moment they froze. Then Sasuke shifted his weight and sent a round kick into his ribs. Naruto cried out as his feet left the ground from the blow and he went tumbling across the ground before skidding to a halt. Getting back to his feet quickly, Naruto tried to prepare an attack only to find Sasuke closing the gap with a punch. Naruto felt a moment of panic and then he felt something else. It was like an instinct and without thinking Naruto followed it, catching the punch and twisting his hips. Suddenly his hands were free and Sasuke was sent hurtling through the air. Putting a hand under him to catch the fall, Sasuke flipped, landing in a crouch. There was another moment of stillness, and then Sasuke pushed off with surprising speed, scowling while shifting his weight for a punch. Here again, Naruto's instincts kicked in and as he had practiced with Anko, he slightly shifted his body and moved his head to the side to avoid the punch aimed at his face. Before Sasuke could register this fact, Naruto was on the inside of his defenses and was lashing out with a palm heel strike aimed at Sasuke's jaw. Naruto was rewarded with a satisfying crack as his hand made contact. The blow did not have the same amount of power as Anko's had, but this was due to Naruto being unable to put his body into it. Still, it was enough to force the Uchiha to tumble backwards from the force of the blow. Sasuke rolled to his feet and leapt backwards, putting space between them while his eyes narrowed and began to evolve into the Sharingan. Naruto was past thinking, relying entirely on his newfound recently developed instincts. Naruto felt his fingers twitching towards his kunai holster, not thinking but knowing he was going to kill the bastard. However, the second and potentially deadly encounter was cut short when a hail of kunai came crashing down around Naruto. As the deadly rain stopped, the familiar form of Anko came hurtling out of the tree limbs overhead to land in a crouch, with her trench coat billowing around her, a few yards away from the children. I can't leave you alone for 1 minute, can I? Anko asked humorously, winking at Naruto. Naruto for his part was consumed in a brief internal battle. Part of him demanded he keep attacking while another part told him to stop. It was settled without a final decision, when another woman, dressed in white and red with feathered hair and freaky red eyes, landed in the clearing behind Anko. Oh. Kurenai. How nice to see you again. Anko chirped, as she turned to look at the scowling woman. Kurenai's gaze swept over her genin, and then over to Naruto, who stuck his tongue out before focusing on Anko. So this is your student? Yep. A bit of a wild child, ain't he? Anko happily replied, eyeing the genin behind Kurenai. Oh, you get a smelly Inuzuka, a worthless Hano and a stuck-up Uchiha. I'm so jealous. Naruto could not decide if he should laugh or not. On the one hand, she had insulted Sakura, yet on the other hand Anko had also insulted, quite rightly, minus Sasuke. It was a tough call and he settled for merely grinning smugly at Sasuke. I hope you're not taking pages from your sensei's book. Kurenai said evenly, eyes darting to Naruto and then back to Anko's face. Naruto, as confused about the question as he was, could not help but notice the deadly undercurrent in his sensei's response. If I ask Kurenai, you'll be the first to know. That said, Anko turned to stare at him, her eyes narrowed. We're leaving, Naruto. Nodding, Naruto hurried to follow his sensei as she moved through the trees away from the training area. Kurenai sensei, who was that? Sakura asked after a moment, free of Kiba's grasp and now fussing over a sulking Sasuke. Someone who should not be teaching. Ever. Kurenai answered sharply. She's hot though. Kiba said, just beginning to recover from the catatonic stupor that it had fallen into when he first saw Anko's attire. Nice legs. Kurenai ignored the comment. Instead, scowling, lost in thought and memories of Anko. To say that Kurena's relationship with Anko was a difficult one would have been an understatement, one akin to describing the Hokage as an above-average ninja. In fact, if Anko were to die, Kurenai would make sure that she was the first in line to dance upon her grave. This was not because Kurenai was a spiteful individual. Generally, she was considered one of the most reserved and professional ninja in the village. However, her relationship with Anko was a special exception. In her mind, Anko was responsible for destroying two of the most important people in her life. The first had been one of her genin teammates whom Anko had ambushed during a Chunin exam. Anko's attack had been brutal and overwhelming, a combination of genbutsu and taibutsu that had left her teammate so mentally scarred and physically crippled that he could not continue as a ninja and ultimately took his own life a few years later. The second was her own older brother during his Jonin exam. Kurenai did not know the details, because no explanation had ever been given apart from a statement that Anko had not acted outside of the parameters of the exam. That seemed to be the trend with Anko. She never acted outside the parameters, and while Kurenai knew that killing and dying was a part of being a ninja, she could not understand Anko. The woman killed without mercy, without compassion, and at times Kurenai even wondered if maybe Anko took a sick pleasure in their suffering. That was why deep down Kurenai believed that the deaths of her friend and brother had been unnecessary, nothing more than attempts to fulfill Anko's twisted lusts. Because of this, Kurenai could never forgive Anko. Not for what had happened, and not for what she had just seen in that boy named Naruto. She had seen the blonde's hand drift toward his kunai. A stupid child's argument had nearly ended in an attempt to kill. Kurenai stopped and scowled, knowing the real truth of the matter. It would not have been an attempt. Naruto would have killed Sasuke. Why? Because Naruto was using the heavy style, even if it did look bastardized, and that was one of the Leaf's 5 Sisat Taibutsu styles. No good came from anyone using that style either. It was forged and created in blood. The blood of rogue Uchihas and Hyugas at the hands of the Leaf's biggest traitor. Kurenai would have to alert the Hokage to the fact that Anko was creating another cold-blooded killer, that Mitarashi Anko was walking the same path as her sensei Orochimaru, that the former apprentice was creating a new generation. Kurenai prayed that the boy could be saved from that fate. She did not blame him and would help him if she could. Still, the biggest problem was making the Hokage see that Anko was not someone who should be training genin. Kurenai sensei? Sakura asked softly, and Kurenai made an indistinct noise. Our mission. Oh. Kurenai said, composing herself and turning to face her team, pulling their mission scroll. It's a C-ranked mission, but I think you guys are ready for it. We've been hired by a smaller country named Wave. They has no hidden village of their own. What are we supposed to do? Kiba asked excitedly, and Kurenai glanced at Sasuke, feeling her heart sink with the dark way he was staring in direction that Naruto had went. Just escort a bridge builder back to his home, and protect him until he finishes his current job. A good mission to get our feet wet with. Kurenai answered, looking away from the dark-haired boy. Kurenai could not risk letting the boys fight again, at least not until she had spoken with the Hokage and something was done to save Naruto from the dark, murderous path that he was starting to walk. That's it to this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe to the next video, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out the other playlist. Hope you would like them too.